They called her the spare daughter, the one left behind when beauty and charm were distributed among the Whitford sisters. For 7 brutal seasons, Eleanor Whitford stood in ballrooms watching men orbit her sisters like moths to flame while she remained invisible. Tonight would be no different, or so she thought. But when Duke Alexander Ravenshire, the most powerful, untouchable man in England, walked past every diamond of the season and stopped in front of her, everything shattered. One choice. The Whitford townhouse on Grosvenor Square gleamed like a jewel box that autumn evening in 1810, every window ablaze with candlelight, every surface polished to mirror brightness. Inside, chaos reigned with the particular hysteria that only accompanied a grand ball. "Eleanor, Eleanor, where have you hidden my emerald earrings?" The shrill voice of Beatrice Whitford, 20 years old and widely celebrated as one of London's most beautiful debutantes, echoed through the upper hallway. "Lord Ashworth will be there, and Mother says he's finally ready to make an offer." "Then I'm certain your earrings will help seal your fate," Eleanor replied evenly, turning back toward her room. "Wait," Beatrice's voice sharpened. "You're not actually planning to attend, are you?" Eleanor paused, her hand on the doorframe. She didn't turn around. "It's our family's ball, Beatrice. Of course I'm attending." "But darling," and now Beatrice's voice dripped with false sweetness, "wouldn't it be kinder to everyone if you simply stayed upstairs? You know how awkward it becomes when gentlemen feel obligated to dance with you out of pity. It makes them uncomfortable, and it makes you look desperate." The words landed like carefully aimed arrows. Eleanor had heard variations of the speech for 7 years, 7 seasons of standing against silk-papered walls while her 3 younger sisters collected proposals like trophies. 7 years of watching her mother's eyes slide past her with disappointment. 7 years of becoming a ghost in her own home. But Eleanor Whitford had learned something valuable in those 7 years. Ghosts saw everything. "I'll stay out of your way," Eleanor said quietly, and closed her door before Beatrice could deliver another blow disguised as sisterly concern. Inside her room, Eleanor sat at her simple dressing table and studied her reflection with the clinical detachment of a scientist examining a specimen. Plain. That was the word they used when they were being kind. Mouse-brown hair that refused to hold a curl. Gray eyes that lacked the dramatic intensity of blue or the warmth of brown. Features that were neither ugly nor beautiful, just unremarkable, forgettable, the visual equivalent of wallpaper. Her sisters were all variations of their mother's celebrated beauty, golden-haired, blue-eyed, blessed with the kind of delicate features that made men write terrible poetry. Eleanor took after their father's side, practical, sturdy, built for endurance rather than admiration. "You have a good mind, Eleanor," her father had told her once, before he had died when she was 50. "That will serve you better than beauty in the long run." But he'd been wrong. Or perhaps the long run was simply longer than a lifetime. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in." Her lady's maid, Mary, entered with Eleanor's gown, a simple creation in pale blue, modest and appropriate for a 24-year-old spinster who'd long since abandoned hope of matrimony. "You look lovely, miss," Mary said loyally as she helped Eleanor dress. "You're a terrible liar, Mary, but I appreciate the effort." Mary's lips twitched with suppressed amusement. At 60, she'd been with the family since Eleanor was born and had watched all 4 Whitford daughters navigate the treacherous waters of the marriage market. Only Eleanor remained unwed, and both women knew the window had effectively closed. "Your mother wants all daughters in the receiving line," Mary said as she fastened the last button. "Of course she does. Can't risk anyone thinking the family is anything less than perfect." Eleanor descended the stairs 20 minutes later to find her mother, Lady Caroline Whitford, inspecting her 3 younger daughters with the intensity of a general reviewing troops before battle. "Beatrice, you're radiant. Cecilia, straighten your posture. Louisa, less rouge. You're a lady, not an actress." Lady Caroline's critical gaze swept over her daughters and snagged on Eleanor like a hem catching on a nail. "Eleanor, you're wearing that?" "It's new, Mother." "It's plain." "It suits me." Lady Caroline's mouth tightened, but she was too shrewd to waste time on battles she'd already lost. "Very well. Take your place." "And Eleanor, I know. Stay at the edges. Don't embarrass the family. Allow my sisters to shine." I was going to say try to look pleasant, but yes, those things too. The receiving line was its own special torture. Guest after guest arrived, greeting Lady Caroline with effusive warmth, complimenting her three beautiful daughters with predictable phrases about flowers and springtime and angels descended from heaven. When they reached Eleanor, their expressions shifted almost imperceptibly. A slight tightening around the eyes, a barely perceptible pause, a hasty, charming to see you, before moving quickly onward. She'd learned to recognize that look. It was the social equivalent of stepping around an obstacle. Lord Ashworth arrived with his mother, a formidable dowager with a lorgnette and an acid tongue. His gaze went straight to Beatrice and stayed there with obvious admiration. "Lady Whitford, your daughter grows more lovely each time I see her," he said, taking Beatrice's hand and holding it just a fraction too long. Beatrice lowered her eyes demurely. "You flatter me, Lord Ashworth." "Impossible to flatter perfection," he murmured. Eleanor suppressed an eye roll. The same lines, different men, year after year. It was like watching the same play with rotating actors. "And Miss Eleanor," Lord Ashworth's mother said, her lorgnette swinging toward Eleanor with the precision of a weapon. "Still here, are you? I'd heard rumors you'd gone north to live with relatives." "As you can see, Lady Ashworth, I remain very much in London." "Yes, I can see that." The dowager's tone suggested this was unfortunate for everyone involved. When the receiving line finally ended and guests flowed into the ballroom, Eleanor did what she'd perfected over 7 seasons. She disappeared. Not physically. That would cause exactly the kind of scandal her mother lived in terror of. But she made herself invisible through careful positioning and strategic timing. She chose spots near large flower arrangements or behind conveniently placed columns. She moved when she needed to move, stood when stillness served her better. She'd mapped every ballroom in London the way a general mapped a battlefield, knowing exactly where the light fell brightest, avoid, where clusters of gossiping matrons gathered, avoid, and where the orchestra positioned themselves, perfect for blending into the background. From her vantage point behind an enormous arrangement of white roses, Eleanor watched the familiar choreography unfold. Beatrice held court near the French doors, surrounded by admirers. Cecilia, 19 and nearly as beautiful, danced every set with a rotation of eligible bachelors. Even Louisa, just 17 and in her first season, had attracted a small cluster of younger sons hoping to secure their futures. Pathetic, isn't it? Eleanor turned to find Margaret Hartley, her only real friend, standing beside her with 2 glasses of champagne. Margaret was 32, sharp-tongued, wealthy in her own right, and utterly uninterested in marriage, which made her a social pariah nearly equal to Eleanor herself. Which part? Eleanor accepted a glass gratefully. All of it. The preening, the posturing, the utterly transparent calculations masquerading as romance. Margaret sipped her champagne. Lord Ashworth has already proposed to 2 other women this season. Both families rejected him because his estate is mortgaged to the rafters. Your mother does realize he's shopping for a fortune, not a wife? Mother believes Beatrice's beauty will reform his gambling habits. Of course she does, because nothing cures a compulsive gambler quite like a pretty face. Margaret's dark eyes swept the ballroom with amused contempt. At least you're honest about what this circus actually is. That's because I'm not a participant. I'm just an observer. Is that what we're calling it now? I prefer exiled to the social wilderness for the crime of being interesting rather than ornamental. Eleanor smiled despite herself. You make it sound almost noble. Darling, it is noble. We're casualties of a system that values breeding stock over actual human beings, but we're conscious casualties, which makes us dangerous. Before Eleanor could respond, a ripple of awareness moved through the ballroom like wind across wheat. Conversations faltered, heads turned, even the music seemed to hesitate. Eleanor rose on her toes, trying to see over the crowd. What's happening? Margaret's eyebrows rose. Well, this is unexpected. What? Margaret, I can't see. Duke Ravenshire just arrived. The name landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples of shock through Eleanor's chest. Everyone in London knew Duke Alexander Ravenshire, powerful, wealthy, politically connected, and famously selective about which social events he honored with his presence. He attended perhaps 1 ball per season, stayed exactly 30 minutes, danced with no one, and left. His appearances were so rare that hostesses whose events he attended could dine out on the prestige for months. And he'd chosen their ball. Eleanor watched as the crowd parted like the Red Sea, creating a clear path from the ballroom entrance to where her mother stood, looking simultaneously thrilled and terrified. The Duke moved through the gap with the easy confidence of a man who'd never doubted his place in the world. Even from a distance, Eleanor could see why he commanded such attention. Tall, dark-haired, perhaps 35, with the kind of aristocratic features that would look equally at home on a Greek statue or a playing card. He wore his formal attire with casual elegance, as if the clothes had been born on his body. But it was something else that caught Eleanor's attention, the way he moved through the room without performing. He didn't smile at the right moments or offer the expected pleasantries. He simply existed, utterly unbothered by the speculation and social calculation swirling around him. "Your mother looks like she might faint," Margaret observed. Indeed, Lady Caroline was curtsying so low that her knees must be screaming in protest. The Duke acknowledged her with a slight nod, said something Eleanor couldn't hear, and then his gaze swept the ballroom. Eleanor felt it like a physical touch when his eyes passed over her section of the room. Dark eyes, unreadable, assessing. They moved across the crowd with mechanical precision, cataloging and dismissing until they stopped. On her. Eleanor's breath caught. It wasn't possible. She was behind the flower arrangement, partially obscured, deliberately positioned to be overlooked. There was no reason for him to notice her, no reason for his gaze to snag on the one unremarkable woman in a room full of celebrated beauties. But his eyes locked with hers across the crowded ballroom, and something flickered in their depths. Recognition? Interest? Confusion? The moment stretched, impossible and electric, until Margaret's voice broke the spell. "Eleanor, is the Duke of Ravenshire staring at you?" "No." Eleanor's voice came out too quickly. "He's looking past me. At someone else." "He's absolutely staring at you." "That's ridiculous." But then the Duke did something that made Eleanor's blood turn to ice water. He walked toward her. Not toward the center of the room where Beatrice stood surrounded by admirers. Not toward Cecilia, who'd positioned herself artfully near the orchestra. Not toward any of the diamond-bright debutantes who'd spent hours preparing for exactly this kind of moment. Toward Eleanor. The crowd rippled again as people tracked his movement, confusion spreading like spilled wine. Conversations died mid-sentence. Dancers stumbled. Eleanor's mother went pale, clearly trying to calculate what this meant, whether it was good or terrible or something entirely unprecedented. "Eleanor," Margaret hissed, "he's coming over here." "Why is he coming over here?" "I don't know," Eleanor whispered back, her heart hammering against her ribs. The Duke stopped in front of them, tall enough that Eleanor had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. Up close, he was even more imposing, not because of his size, but because of the intensity in his gaze. He looked at her the way a scholar might examine an unexpected discovery, with focused curiosity and without the dismissive glance she'd grown accustomed to. "Miss Whitford?" His voice was deep, cultured, with an edge of something Eleanor couldn't quite identify. "Yes, Your Grace?" She somehow kept her voice steady, despite the fact that every eye in the ballroom had turned toward them. "I wonder if you might honor me with the next dance." The ballroom went silent. Eleanor stared at him, convinced she'd misheard. I beg your pardon?" "A dance," he repeated patiently. "The waltz, I believe, is next on the program." "Your Grace, I think there's been some confusion. I'm Eleanor Whitford, the eldest daughter. Perhaps you meant to ask." "I know exactly who you are, Miss Whitford, and I'm asking you to dance." Eleanor's mind raced through possibilities. This had to be a mistake. A joke. A cruel wager. Men like Duke Ravenshire didn't notice women like her, didn't cross ballrooms to request dances from confirmed spinsters when the room overflowed with younger, prettier options. Why? The word escaped before she could stop it. His eyebrows rose slightly. "I beg your pardon?" "Why me?" "Forgive my bluntness, Your Grace, but you could ask any woman in this room to dance. Women who would actually benefit from your attention, who would—" She stopped herself, aware she was very close to insulting both of them. Something that might have been amusement flickered across his features. "Perhaps I prefer to dance with someone who questions rather than simpers. Perhaps I've grown tired of predictability. Or perhaps—" And now his voice dropped slightly, for her ears only. I simply wish to dance with the most interesting woman in the room." Eleanor felt the foundations of her carefully constructed worldview beginning to crack. "Your Grace, The music is beginning, Miss Whitford. Will you do me the honor, or shall I be forced to stand here awkwardly while you debate my motivations?" Despite everything, the shock, the confusion, the certain knowledge that this would end badly, Eleanor found herself placing her hand in his. The crowd parted once more as he led her onto the dance floor. Eleanor could feel the weight of 100 stares, the shock radiating from her sisters, the calculation in her mother's eyes, the pure, vicious delight from the gossips who'd already begun composing tomorrow's scandalous whispers. The Duke's hand settled on her waist. His other hand took hers. The waltz began. He moved with the same confident grace he brought to everything else, leading her through the steps with easy competence. Eleanor had been taught to dance, all well-bred young ladies were, but she'd rarely had opportunity to practice. Yet somehow, with him, it felt natural. "You dance well," he said after a moment. "You sound surprised." "I am. Most women I've danced with treat it as performance. You treat it as conversation." Eleanor wasn't sure what that meant, so she said nothing, focusing on not tripping over her own feet while the entire ballroom watched. "You're wondering why I asked you," he said. "It wasn't a question." "Among other things, yes." "What other things?" She met his eyes, those dark, unreadable eyes. "Whether this is a wager, whether you're making a point, whether you'll disappear after this dance and leave me to deal with the speculation alone." Remarkably cynical for a young lady at her first ball. "This is my 8th season, Your Grace. Cynicism is what one develops after 7 years of being invisible." His expression shifted slightly. "You're not invisible." "Respectfully, Your Grace, until approximately 10 minutes ago, I very much was." They turned through another rotation. Eleanor could see Beatrice near the edge of the floor, her face a mask of confusion and something darker. Lord Ashworth stood beside her, looking between the dancing couple and his prospective bride with the calculation of a man reassessing his options. "I've made things complicated for you," the Duke said. "Yes. I could apologize, but I won't. You deserve to be seen, Miss Whitford, even if the seeing comes with complications." "I'm not a charity case, Your Grace." "No," he agreed. "You're something far more valuable. You're honest." The waltz ended. The Duke bowed. Eleanor curtsied, and as he escorted her back to the side of the ballroom, she felt the weight of those 100 stares transform into something more dangerous, speculation. "Thank you for the dance, Miss Whitford," the Duke said, loud enough for those nearby to hear, then quieter, just for her. "I'll call on you tomorrow afternoon, if that's acceptable." Eleanor's heart stopped. "Your Grace, I don't think—" 2 o'clock. "Good evening, Miss Whitford." And then he was gone, exiting the ballroom with the same purposeful grace he'd entered with, leaving chaos in his wake. Eleanor stood frozen as the crowd's attention shifted from the departed Duke to her. Whispers erupted like brush fire. Her mother materialized at her elbow with the speed of a woman scenting opportunity. "Eleanor, my study, now." The next 30 minutes were among the strangest of Eleanor's life. Her mother paced the small study while Beatrice, Cecilia, and even young Louisa crowded in, all demanding explanations Eleanor couldn't provide. "What did you do?" Beatrice's voice was sharp with accusation. "I danced, at his request." "Don't be obtuse." "What did you say to him? How did you attract his attention?" "I didn't do anything. I was standing with Margaret when he approached." "Margaret Hartley?" Lady Caroline's voice rose. "You were associating with that woman in public? Eleanor, her reputation is exactly as spotless as mine, Mother, given that neither of us have prospects to damage." "Well, you certainly have prospects now." Lady Caroline's expression shifted from anger to calculation with frightening speed. "Duke Ravenshire." "The Duke of Ravenshire showed interest in you. Do you understand what this means?" "It means he'll realize his mistake tomorrow and never speak to me again." "It means," her mother said slowly, as if explaining to a child, "that you have one chance. One chance, Eleanor, to secure the most advantageous match in England. You will be charming tomorrow when he calls. You will be engaging, You will be everything he apparently saw in you tonight, whatever that might have been. And if I refuse to receive him? The room went silent. Lady Caroline's face hardened. You will not refuse. This family has invested years in your sister's futures. If the Duke shows a preference for you, regardless of how inexplicable that preference might be, you will not sabotage this opportunity. Am I understood? Eleanor looked at her mother, at her sisters, at the desperate hope and calculation in their eyes. They didn't care about her happiness. They cared about the title, the wealth, the elevation and status that a ducal connection would bring to the entire family. I understand perfectly, Mother. Good. Now go to bed. You'll need rest if you're to look your best tomorrow. Eleanor climbed the stairs to her room in a daze. Mary was waiting, ready to help her undress, but Eleanor waved her away. I need a moment alone, Mary. Of course, miss. When the door closed, Eleanor moved to her window and looked out over the darkened square. Somewhere in London, Duke Alexander Ravenshire was returning to his residence, perhaps already regretting his impulsive invitation. Tomorrow he'd send a note claiming urgent business. The speculation would die down. Life would return to normal. But as Eleanor stood at the window, still wearing her simple blue gown, still feeling the ghost of his hand on her waist, she wondered if that was what she actually wanted. Normal meant invisible. Normal meant safe but suffocating. Normal meant watching her life pass by while she stood in corners pretending not to feel anything. Whatever game the Duke was playing, whatever his motivations, he'd offered her something tonight: visibility. For the first time in 7 years, someone had looked directly at her and chosen her over everyone else in the room. It would end badly. Eleanor wasn't naive enough to believe otherwise. Men like Duke Ravenshire didn't marry women like her. This was a momentary aberration, a brief disruption before the natural order reasserted itself. But for one waltz, she hadn't been invisible. And that, Eleanor realized with a mixture of fear and exhilaration, changed everything. The clock in the hallway chimed midnight. Tomorrow would bring answers, or more likely, disappointment. But tonight, standing at her window in the darkness, Eleanor Whitford allowed herself something she hadn't permitted in years: hope. Even if it was foolish, even if it would break her, even if every lesson she'd learned about the world suggested she should protect herself by expecting nothing. For one night, she let herself hope, and somewhere across London, in a grand residence that dwarfed the Whitford townhouse, Duke Alexander Ravenshire sat in his study and wondered what exactly had possessed him to throw a stone into the carefully ordered waters of society. He'd noticed Eleanor Whitford the moment he'd entered that ballroom, not despite her position at the edges, but because of it. While every other woman performed for attention, she simply existed, observing, analyzing, utterly unconcerned with being observed herself. In a room full of women desperate to be chosen, she was the only one who didn't seem to care about the game at all. And that made her the most dangerous woman in London. Because Alexander Ravenshire hadn't built his power by following rules. He'd built it by recognizing value where others saw nothing, in investments, in political alliances, in people. And Eleanor Whitford was valuable. Tomorrow would prove whether she recognized that value in herself. If she did, things would become very interesting indeed. If she didn't, well, Alexander hadn't reached his position by giving up easily. He'd said he would call at 2 o'clock, and Duke Alexander Ravenshire always kept his word. Morning arrived with the subtlety of a firing squad. Eleanor woke to Mary drawing back the curtains with unnecessary vigor, flooding the room with pale autumn sunlight that felt accusatory. Your mother requests your presence at breakfast, miss. Immediately. Eleanor groaned and pulled the covers over her head. Tell her I've contracted plague. She said you'd say that. She also said if you're not downstairs in 15 minutes, she'll come up herself. That got Eleanor moving. Lady Caroline ascending to the bedrooms meant a crisis of epic proportions, and Eleanor had no desire to face that particular storm before coffee. She dressed quickly in a morning gown of dove gray, practical, unremarkable, the uniform of a woman who'd long since given up trying to compete. When she entered the breakfast room, all conversation stopped with the abruptness of a guillotine blade. Her mother sat at the head of the table, flanked by all 3 sisters. 4 pairs of eyes tracked Eleanor's progress to the sideboard with the intensity of hunters watching prey. Good morning. Eleanor said carefully, loading her plate with toast she had no appetite for. Sit down, Eleanor. Lady Caroline's voice could have frozen champagne. Eleanor sat. Beatrice struck first. Lord Ashworth left the ball early last night, after your spectacle with the Duke. I'm sorry to hear that, Eleanor said, meaning it. Whatever her feelings about Beatrice, she knew her sister had genuinely hoped for Ashworth's proposal. Sorry? Beatrice's laugh was sharp as broken glass. You're sorry? You deliberately sabotaged my chances. I did nothing of the sort. I didn't ask the Duke to dance with me. But you accepted, Cecilia chimed in, her pretty face twisted with uncharacteristic venom. You could have declined. You could have suggested he dance with one of us instead. But no, you had to take your one moment of attention and ruin everything for the rest of us. Eleanor set down her teacup with exaggerated care. How exactly does one dance ruin everything? Lord Ashworth was interested in Beatrice last week. One waltz shouldn't have changed that. It changed everything, Lady Caroline said quietly, and something in her tone made Eleanor's stomach drop. By midnight, every gossip in London knew the Duke of Ravenshire had singled you out. By this morning, 3 families have sent notes withdrawing their sons from consideration for your sisters. They're waiting to see what the Duke does next. The words landed like stones. That's insane. One dance means nothing. It means everything when it's Duke Ravenshire. Her mother's fingers drummed against the table. He attends 1 ball per season. He never dances. He never shows preference. And he chose you. Whether you understand it or not, that single choice has repositioned this entire family in society's eyes. If he pursues you, we rise. If he doesn't, she didn't finish the sentence. If he doesn't, we're worse off than before, Beatrice finished bitterly, because everyone will wonder what's wrong with us if even our plainest sister couldn't hold his interest. The cruelty was casual, reflexive, worn smooth by years of repetition. Eleanor felt it slide off her like water off oilcloth. She'd built armor against words like plain and plainest. They couldn't hurt what was already numb. He said he'd call at 2 o'clock, Eleanor said. The room erupted. He's calling? Louisa's eyes went wide. Here? Today? Cecilia looked between triumph and panic. You didn't think to mention this last night? Lady Caroline's voice climbed an octave. You were too busy instructing me on what to do when he called. I assumed you already knew. Her mother stood abruptly. We have 5 hours. Cecilia, fetch the good china from storage. Louisa, cut fresh flowers for the drawing room. Beatrice, you'll need to be visible, but not intrusive when he arrives. Eleanor, go upstairs and have Mary do something with your hair. Mother, do not argue with me, Eleanor. This is the most important day of your life, whether you recognize it or not. You will be presentable, charming, and you will not, under any circumstances, do anything to discourage his interest. Am I clear? Eleanor met her mother's gaze and saw something she'd never seen before. Desperation. Lady Caroline had built her entire identity on launching her daughters into advantageous marriages. If Eleanor somehow managed to secure a duke while her more beautiful sisters settled for lesser matches, it would shatter every assumption her mother had built a lifetime defending. Perfectly clear, Eleanor said. The next 4 hours passed in a blur of preparation that felt more like battle readiness than courtship. The house was scrubbed, polished, and arranged to project casual elegance. Fresh flowers appeared in every room. The good silver emerged from storage. Even the servants were given fresh livery and stern instructions on proper deportment. Eleanor herself was primped, pinned, and dressed in a gown of deep burgundy that Mary swore brought out hidden warmth in her complexion. Her hair was arranged in a style that took 2 hours and approximately 500 pins. By the time Mary declared her ready, Eleanor barely recognized herself in the mirror. You look lovely, miss, Mary said. I look like I'm trying too hard. You look like a woman worthy of a duke's attention. At precisely 2 minutes before 2 o'clock, the entire family assembled in the drawing room in a tableau so carefully arranged it looked rehearsed. Lady Caroline sat near the window with needlework she had no intention of touching. Beatrice positioned herself at the pianoforte, Cecilia with a book of poetry, Louisa with watercolors. Eleanor was placed on the settee nearest the door, visible but not forward, accessible but not eager. Remember, Lady Caroline hissed, let him lead the conversation. Be pleasant but not effusive. Smile but don't laugh too loudly. And for heaven's sake, Eleanor, try to look interested in whatever he says. The clock struck 2. Nothing happened. 5 minutes passed. 10. 15. Beatrice's fingers began tapping against the pianoforte keys in an irritating pattern. Cecilia turned pages without reading them. Lady Caroline's needlework lay forgotten in her lap, while her eyes remained fixed on the window overlooking the street. Perhaps he was delayed, Louisa ventured. Perhaps he changed his mind, Beatrice said with poorly concealed satisfaction. Eleanor said nothing. She'd expected this. Hoped for it, even. The Duke would send a note claiming urgent business, and life would return to its familiar, invisible rhythms. The brief moment of visibility would fade, and Eleanor could return to the safety of obscurity. She told herself this was what she wanted. She told herself the hollow feeling in her chest was relief. At precisely 2:30, a knock sounded at the door. The entire room froze. Lady Caroline's hand flew to her throat. Beatrice's fingers stilled on the keys. Even the servants, trained to discretion, seemed to hold their breath. The butler appeared in the doorway, his face carefully neutral. "Your Grace, the Duke of Ravenshire." Eleanor's heart stopped as the Duke entered the drawing room with the same purposeful grace he'd displayed at the ball. He wore riding attire, clearly having come directly from somewhere else, and his dark hair showed signs of wind. He looked vital, alive, utterly real in a room that suddenly felt like a stage set. "Lady Whitford," he said, bowing to Eleanor's mother. "Thank you for receiving me." Lady Caroline practically levitated from her chair. "Your Grace, what an unexpected pleasure. May I present my daughters? You've already met Eleanor, of course, and this is Beatrice, Cecilia, and Louisa." The Duke acknowledged each sister with a polite nod, but his eyes returned to Eleanor with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Miss Whitford, I wonder if you might join me for a ride in Hyde Park. The weather is exceptionally fine, and I find I have need of intelligent conversation." The room went silent. Riding in Hyde Park with a gentleman was as good as a public declaration of interest. Every member of society took afternoon rides specifically to see and be seen. If Eleanor appeared beside the Duke in his curricle, by nightfall all of London would know. "I'm not certain," Eleanor began. "She'd be delighted," Lady Caroline interrupted. "Eleanor adores riding. Don't you, dear?" Eleanor had been on a horse exactly 3 times in her life and loathed every minute. "Mother, I don't think—" "Nonsense! It will be lovely. Eleanor, fetch your spencer and bonnet. Your Grace, perhaps some refreshment while you wait." 10 minutes later, Eleanor found herself seated beside the Duke in an elegant curricle, heading toward Hyde Park, while her mother's instructions echoed in her ears like a death knell. They rode in silence for several minutes. The Duke handled the reins with casual expertise, guiding the matched pair of greys through London's crowded streets with the ease of long practice. Eleanor kept her hands folded in her lap and tried to remember how to breathe normally. "You're angry," he said finally. Eleanor blinked. "I beg your pardon?" "Angry, possibly furious. You've barely looked at me since we left your house." "I'm not angry, Your Grace. I'm confused." "About what?" "About why you're doing this." Eleanor turned to face him directly, abandoning the pretense of demure indirection. "You don't know me. Yesterday was the first time we'd ever spoken, and yet you're parading me through Hyde Park as if we have an understanding. Why?" He was quiet for a moment, his attention seemingly focused on the horses. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "Do you play chess, Miss Whitford?" "Occasionally. My father taught me before he died." "Then you understand that the most dangerous pieces on the board are the ones your opponent overlooks. The knight in the corner. The bishop positioned 3 moves ago. The pawn everyone assumes is harmless." He glanced at her. "You're that piece." "I'm not a chess piece, Your Grace. I'm a woman asking why you've decided to upend her life." "Fair enough." He guided the curricle through the park gates, and Eleanor felt the weight of a dozen stares as people recognized him. "The truth? I'm tired of the game. Every woman I meet performs a carefully rehearsed role. They say what they think I want to hear. They laugh at remarks that aren't amusing. They position themselves like products in a shop window, hoping I'll purchase them. And I don't do those things? Last night, you questioned my motivations to my face. You challenged me. You treated our dance as if it were actually a dance, not an audition for the role of Duchess. It was, he paused, searching for the word, refreshing. So I'm interesting because I'm rude? His mouth quirked. You're interesting because you're honest. Do you know how rare that is? Your Grace, honesty is only valuable if it comes from someone worth listening to. I'm the woman nobody notices, the one left standing when all the pretty girls are chosen. You may find my honesty refreshing now, but in a week, a day even, you'll realize that my frankness is just another word for unsuitability. I don't fit in your world. Perhaps I'm tired of my world. Eleanor laughed, the sound sharp and humorless. You're a duke. You are your world. You can't simply decide you're bored with it and choose differently. Society doesn't work that way. Society works exactly how the most powerful members decide it works. And I'm rather powerful, Miss Whitford. They turned onto Rotten Row, the fashionable riding path where London's elite gathered each afternoon. Eleanor felt the conversation die around them like candles being snuffed. Heads turned, eyes widened, whispers erupted in their wake like small fires catching. They're staring, Eleanor said quietly. Let them. Your Grace, Alexander, when we're alone, call me Alexander. That's entirely inappropriate. So is most of what I'm doing, apparently, but I'm doing it anyway. A familiar voice called out from a nearby group of riders. Ravenshire? Didn't expect to see you here today. The Duke, Alexander, slowed the curricle as a man on horseback approached. He was perhaps 40, well-dressed, with the kind of face that suggested too much port and too little exercise. Viscount Hawthorne, Alexander said neutrally, may I present Miss Eleanor Whitford? Miss Whitford, Viscount Hawthorne sits on several committees with me in Parliament. Hawthorne's gaze swept over Eleanor with naked assessment. Whitford, any relation to the beauties I met at the Carrington Ball last month? My sisters, Lord Hawthorne. Ah, well, his meaning was clear enough. Eleanor was the disappointing relation to the noteworthy sisters. Ravenshire, I trust we'll see you at the Pemberton dinner next week? I'm afraid I'll be otherwise engaged. Hawthorne's eyebrows rose. The Pemberton dinner? You've attended every year for a decade. Then I'm overdue for a change. Good day, Hawthorne. Alexander urged the horses forward before the Viscount could respond. Eleanor sat rigid beside him, feeling the weight of Hawthorne's speculation pressing against her spine. You didn't need to do that, she said. Do what? Skip the Pemberton dinner on my account. I'm not worth social disruption, Your Grace. He pulled the curricle to a stop beneath a large oak tree, away from the main path. Then he turned to face her fully, his dark eyes intense. Stop doing that. Doing what? Diminishing yourself. Apologizing for existing. Treating yourself as if you're worth less than everyone else. His voice wasn't angry. It was something closer to frustrated. Do you know what I saw last night when I entered that ballroom? Women far more beautiful than me? Performing seals. Every single one of them competing for attention, positioning themselves, calculating their next move. And then I saw you, standing at the edge, watching everything with the expression of a general surveying a battlefield. You weren't performing. You were thinking, analyzing, actually present in the moment, rather than 3 steps ahead, planning your next strategic move. Eleanor stared at him. That's because I'd already lost, Your Grace. I wasn't strategizing because there was no strategy that would work for me. I was invisible. You were overlooked. There's a difference. Not from where I was standing. He studied her face for a long moment. Someone hurt you. Taught you to think of yourself as less than you are. The world taught me that, Your Grace. Every ball where men looked through me, every season where my younger sisters received proposals while I received pity, every conversation that died when I approached. I didn't need one person to teach me my value. I had an entire society willing to do it. And what if society is wrong? Society is never wrong, not when everyone agrees. Everyone agreed the earth was flat once. Consensus doesn't create truth, Miss Whitford. It just creates comfortable lies that no one questions. Before Eleanor could respond, a curricle pulled alongside theirs with enough speed to make the horses shy. Alexander steadied them with a soft word and a firm hand, then turned to see who'd approached so recklessly. The woman driving was perhaps 30, strikingly beautiful, dressed in a riding habit of deep emerald that matched her eyes. Her dark hair was arranged in perfect ringlets, and she handled her own reins with practiced ease. "Alexander," she said, her voice warm and familiar. "How delightful to see you." The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Alexander's expression shifted to something carefully neutral, the look of a man confronted by an unpleasant surprise. "Lady Victoria, it's been weeks since you've called. I was beginning to think you'd forgotten me." Lady Victoria's gaze slid to Eleanor with the precision of a blade. "And who is your companion?" "Miss Eleanor Whitford. May I present Lady Victoria Ashford?" The name registered like a pistol shot. Everyone in London knew Lady Victoria Ashford, beautiful, wealthy, widowed young, and widely assumed to be Alexander's future Duchess. They'd been seen together at various events over the past year. Some gossips claimed they were already engaged privately. "Whitford," Lady Victoria repeated thoughtfully. "Any relation to the Whitford sisters? I've heard they're quite lovely." "Eleanor is the eldest," Alexander said, an edge to his voice. "How nice!" Lady Victoria's smile could have cut glass. "Alexander, you really must come to my salon next Thursday. I'm hosting Lord Byron, and he's promised to read from his latest work. You know how much you enjoy poetry." "I'm afraid I'll be occupied." "Pity." Lady Victoria's gaze returned to Eleanor, and Eleanor felt herself being assessed and dismissed in a single glance. "Well, don't let me interrupt your outing, Miss Whitford. How lovely to meet you." She departed as abruptly as she'd arrived, leaving an awkward silence in her wake. Eleanor spoke first. "You didn't mention you had an understanding with Lady Victoria Ashford." "I don't have an understanding with her." "She seems to believe otherwise." "Victoria believes many things that have no basis in reality." Alexander's jaw tightened. "We've been acquainted for years. She's a friend of my late mother's family, nothing more." "Your Grace, Alexander, you need to understand something." Eleanor turned to face him fully. "I'm not equipped for this. Whatever game you're playing, whatever point you're trying to make about overlooked women or unconventional choices, I can't be your chess piece. Lady Victoria is beautiful, connected, appropriate for a man of your position. I'm none of those things. You're honest, intelligent, and entirely yourself. That makes you infinitely more appropriate. That makes me unmarriageable to someone in your position. Perhaps I disagree with your assessment of what my position requires." "Then you're delusional." Eleanor's voice rose despite her best efforts. "You're a duke. You have responsibilities, expectations, a legacy to maintain. You need a duchess who can navigate society, who can host dinners and manage estates and produce heirs without embarrassing you. I can't even get through a ball without hiding behind flower arrangements." "What if I don't want someone who navigates society? What if I want someone who challenges it?" "Then you want a fantasy, not a wife." The words hung between them like smoke. Alexander's expression was unreadable, but something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or reassessment. "Take me home," Eleanor said quietly. "Please. This was a mistake." He didn't argue. They rode back through the park in silence, the weight of unspoken words pressing down like storm clouds. Eleanor kept her eyes forward, refusing to acknowledge the stares and whispers that followed them. When they reached the Whitford townhouse, Alexander helped her down from the curricle with formal courtesy. His hand lingered on hers for just a moment. "I don't give up easily, Miss Whitford." "Then you're about to learn a valuable lesson in disappointment, Your Grace." She went inside without looking back, her heart hammering against her ribs. The drawing room was empty. Her mother and sisters must have been watching from upstairs windows, which gave Eleanor a moment to breathe before the interrogation began. But she'd barely removed her spencer when Beatrice appeared in the doorway. "He's leaving," she said flatly. Eleanor looked out the window to see Alexander's curricle pulling away. "Yes. You ruined it, didn't you? Whatever chance you had, you pushed him away." "There was nothing to ruin. He was curious." "Now he's satisfied his curiosity. Life returns to normal." "Normal?" Beatrice laughed bitterly. "Eleanor, do you have any idea what you've done? Every eligible man in London is now watching to see what the Duke does next. If he pursues you, they'll wonder what they've been missing. If he doesn't, they'll assume something is fundamentally wrong with this family. You've made us all pawns in whatever game you're playing." "I'm not playing anything." You think this is bad? Cecilia appeared beside Beatrice, her face flushed with anger. Lord Hartwell withdrew his interest this morning. His mother sent a note saying they needed to reassess the family's prospects. 2 other families have done the same. Your single dance with the Duke has poisoned everything. Eleanor felt cold spreading through her chest. I didn't ask for any of this. But you didn't reject it either, Beatrice's voice climbed. You could have said no when he asked you to dance. You could have declined his invitation today. But you didn't, because for once in your pathetic life, someone was paying attention to you, and you couldn't resist the chance to feel important. The words landed like physical blows. Eleanor stared at her sister, seeing years of resentment crystallizing into this single moment. You're right, Eleanor said quietly. I should have said no. I should have protected you. I'm sorry. The apology seemed to drain the anger from Beatrice's face, leaving something rawer behind. Just fix this, Eleanor. Whatever you have to do. Make him lose interest. Make him go away. Return things to how they were. Eleanor nodded and climbed the stairs to her room, each step heavier than the last. Mary was waiting, ready to help her change, but Eleanor waved her away. She needed to be alone, needed to think. But thinking only made it worse. Beatrice was right. Eleanor had seized her moment of visibility without considering the consequences for her family. She'd been so focused on her own years of invisibility that she'd failed to see how one dance could shift the entire social landscape. The solution was simple: discourage Alexander's interest. Be cold, dull, everything a duke's future wife shouldn't be. He'd lose interest quickly enough, and the gossips would move on to fresher scandals. Eleanor sat at her writing desk and pulled out a sheet of paper. She'd write him a note, make her position clear, end this before it went any further. But when she picked up her pen, no words came. Because beneath the guilt and the logic and the practical considerations, Eleanor couldn't deny one truth. For the first time in 7 years, she'd felt seen. Not invisible, not overlooked, not dismissed, seen. And giving that up felt like choosing to suffocate. A knock at her door made her jump. Come in. Margaret Hartley swept into the room without waiting for permission, her face alive with barely contained excitement. Tell me everything. And I mean everything. I heard you rode through Hyde Park with Ravenshear and encountered Victoria Ashford, and the entire city is losing its collective mind. Eleanor dropped her head into her hands. It's a disaster. It's magnificent. Do you know how many women would kill to have the Duke of Ravensshire upend society for them? He's not upending society for me. He's having a momentary lapse in judgment that's making my entire family miserable. Margaret sat on the bed, her expression sobering. Your sisters, you mean? They're losing prospects because of me. Beatrice is right. I should have refused him from the start. Beatrice is desperate, and desperate people say cruel things. That doesn't make them true. Margaret studied Eleanor's face. What do you want, Eleanor? Not what your mother wants. Not what your sisters want. You. Eleanor looked at her friend helplessly. I want to stop being invisible, but not like this. Not at everyone else's expense. What if stopping being invisible requires some people being uncomfortable? What if your sister's comfort has always come at the expense of your own? That's different. Is it? Has anyone in your family ever considered your happiness, your prospects? Or have they simply assumed you'd accept your role as the unmarriageable daughter who makes everyone else look better by comparison? The truth of it hit like cold water. Eleanor had never questioned her role because questioning it seemed pointless. But Margaret was right. Her invisibility had been convenient for everyone. The plain eldest daughter who made the beautiful younger sisters shine brighter. What do I do? Eleanor whispered. Margaret's smile was sharp. You do what terrifies you most, darling. You choose yourself. Before Eleanor could respond, a commotion erupted downstairs. Raised voices, the sound of the front door opening, her mother's voice climbing to a pitch that suggested either catastrophe or triumph. Both women rushed to the landing and looked down to see a footman carrying an enormous arrangement of white roses into the entrance hall. Behind him came another footman with another arrangement, and another. By the time the parade ended, the entrance hall looked like a greenhouse. Lady Caroline stood in the center of it all, holding a card with shaking hands. When she looked up and saw Eleanor on the landing, her expression was complex, equal parts shock, calculation, and something that might have been grudging respect. They're for you, she said. All of them. Eleanor descended slowly, taking the card from her mother's hand. The message was brief, written in a strong, decisive hand. Miss Whitford, I stand corrected. You're not a chess piece. You're the entire game. A.R. Eleanor stared at the card, her heart pounding. Around her, the scent of roses filled the air like a declaration of war. And somewhere across London, Duke Alexander Ravenshire smiled and moved his next piece into position. The roses arrived every morning for a week. Monday brought white roses. Tuesday, deep crimson. Wednesday, a rare variety Eleanor had never seen before, pale pink edged with gold. Each arrangement came with a card bearing a single line in Alexander's distinctive hand. Invisibility is a choice. Stop choosing it. Society's rules exist to protect mediocrity. I'm a patient man, Miss Whitford, but I don't wait forever. By Friday, the Whitford townhouse resembled a botanical garden. Every available surface bloomed with flowers. The scent became so overwhelming that Lady Caroline developed headaches and took to her rooms with lavender-soaked cloths pressed to her temples. Eleanor's sisters stopped speaking to her entirely. The silence was worse than their anger. Beatrice moved through the house like a ghost, her face drawn and pale. Cecilia's eyes were perpetually red-rimmed from crying. Even sweet Louisa, who'd never said an unkind word to anyone, looked at Eleanor with something approaching hatred. You have to make him stop, Margaret said on Friday afternoon, examining the latest arrangement, a stunning cascade of cream-colored roses threaded with ivy. They sat in Eleanor's room because the drawing room had become impassable. I've tried. I sent 3 letters asking him to cease his attentions. He ignores them. Have you considered that perhaps he's not ignoring them so much as rejecting your assessment of the situation? Eleanor stood and paced to the window. Below, another carriage had stopped. More flowers, undoubtedly. My assessment is reality, Margaret. Every day he continues this, my family suffers more. Do you know what happened yesterday? Mrs. Pemberton cut my mother in the street. Directly cut her. Refused to acknowledge her existence. Mrs. Pemberton is a social climbing harpy whose opinion shouldn't matter to anyone with sense. But it does matter. That's the point. In our world, opinion is currency, and mine is destroying my family's fortune. Eleanor pressed her forehead against the cool glass. I should never have danced with him. I should never have accepted the ride. I should have known better. Margaret was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was uncharacteristically gentle. Eleanor, I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly, not as a dutiful daughter or a responsible sister, as yourself. All right, do you want him to stop? The question hung in the air like smoke. Eleanor opened her mouth to say yes. Of course, yes. Please make this nightmare end. But the word stuck in her throat because it would be a lie. Every morning when the flowers arrived, her heart leaped. Every card made her hands shake. Every day that passed without seeing him felt hollow in a way she couldn't quite name. It doesn't matter what I want, Eleanor said finally. That's not an answer. It's the only answer that matters. A knock at the door interrupted them. Mary entered, looking flustered. Miss Eleanor, your mother requests your presence in the drawing room immediately. The Duke of Ravenshire has called. Eleanor's heart stopped. He's here? In the flesh, miss, and he's asked to speak with you. Alone. Margaret's eyebrows rose. Well, this should be interesting. Eleanor descended the stairs with the grim determination of someone walking to the gallows. In the drawing room, her mother stood rigid as a statue, her face a mask of conflicting emotions. Alexander stood by the window, examining one of his own flower arrangements with an expression of mild amusement. He turned when Eleanor entered, and the intensity of his gaze made her breath catch. Miss Whitford, thank you for seeing me. Your Grace, Eleanor curtsied with mechanical precision. Mother, perhaps you should stay. The Duke has requested a private conversation, Lady Caroline said tightly. I'll be just outside the door, which will remain open. She swept from the room, leaving the door ajar exactly 6 inches, the minimum distance propriety allowed. Silence stretched between them. Alexander looked different today, less polished, more windblown, as if he'd ridden hard to get here. There were shadows under his eyes that suggested sleepless nights. You've been ignoring my letters, Eleanor said. I've been reading them thoroughly. I simply disagree with their contents. You can't disagree with reality, Your Grace. Alexander. and I can disagree with your interpretation of reality." He crossed to where she stood, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "You think you're protecting your family by pushing me away. You're not. You're teaching them that you'll sacrifice yourself to maintain their comfort. That's what families do. We sacrifice for each other." "Do they sacrifice for you, Eleanor?" The use of her given name felt intimate, dangerous. "That's not the point." "It's exactly the point. Has your mother ever refused an invitation to protect your feelings? Have your sisters ever turned down a suitor who insulted you? Have any of them ever chosen your happiness over their own advancement?" Eleanor's hands clenched into fists. "You don't understand our situation. I understand that you've been conditioned to believe you're worth less than everyone around you, and I understand that I have no intention of allowing you to continue that particular delusion. This isn't about my worth, it's about practical reality. You're a duke. I'm a nobody. Society doesn't forgive that kind of mismatch, no matter how many flowers you send. Then perhaps it's time society learned a new lesson. You can't teach society anything. You can only survive it or be crushed by it." Eleanor's voice rose despite her best efforts. "And right now, you're crushing my family. Your family is crushing itself by clinging to outdated expectations." Alexander's expression hardened. "Do you know what I did this week, Eleanor? I attended every social event your sisters were invited to. I made it clear through my presence and my conversation that the Whitford family had my favor. I've single-handedly prevented the complete social isolation your mother feared." Eleanor stared at him. "Why?" "Because you matter to me, and what happens to your family matters to you." His voice softened. "I'm trying to protect you, Eleanor, even as you fight me at every turn." "I don't need protection. I need you to leave me alone so life can return to normal." "Normal was making you miserable. Normal was safe. Safe and suffocating are not the same thing." Before Eleanor could respond, a commotion erupted in the entrance hall. Raised voices, the sharp click of expensive boots on marble, a woman's laugh that cut through the air like broken glass. Lady Victoria Ashford swept into the drawing room without waiting for announcement, her emerald eyes bright with malicious amusement. Behind her trailed two other society matrons, both wearing expressions of avid curiosity. "Alexander, darling, I do hope I'm not interrupting." Victoria's gaze swept over Eleanor with theatrical surprise. "Oh, Miss Whitford. Still here, I see." Lady Caroline appeared in the doorway, her face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "Lady Victoria, you cannot simply—" "I'm here at Mrs. Pemberton's request, actually. We're conducting informal calls on several families today." Victoria's smile was razor sharp. "Though I must say, I'm fascinated to find Alexander here. Again, one might almost think he was courting you, Miss Whitford." The word courting hung in the air like an accusation. "Lady Victoria," Alexander's voice had gone cold, "this is a private conversation." "Is it? How deliciously scandalous. A private conversation between an unmarried woman and a gentleman. With the door open, of course, but still." Victoria moved further into the room, her companions following like jackals scenting blood. "Tell me, Miss Whitford, has the Duke proposed yet? Or is he simply enjoying the novelty of slumming before returning to appropriate company?" "That's enough." Alexander's voice cracked like a whip. But Victoria wasn't finished. "Because I must confess, we've all been wondering, what exactly does the plainest Whitford sister possess that could possibly interest a man of your stature, Alexander? Can't be beauty. Her younger sisters have that covered. It can't be charm. I've heard she barely speaks at parties. Money? No, the Whitfords are comfortable but hardly wealthy. So what is it? What's the secret appeal?" Eleanor felt the words land like acid. Around her, the room had gone silent. Her mother stood frozen in the doorway. Somewhere upstairs, she knew her sisters were listening, probably with grim satisfaction. This was the moment to retreat, to shrink, to become invisible again, and let this nightmare end. Instead, Eleanor looked Victoria Ashford directly in the eye and spoke with a clarity that surprised even herself. "You want to know what I have that you don't, Lady Victoria? I'll tell you, I have the courage to be exactly who I am, without performance or pretense. I don't need to be beautiful because I'm not trying to be purchased. I don't need to be charming because I'm not selling anything. And I certainly don't need to invade other people's homes with my entourage to feel important. Victoria's face went white with shock. Eleanor continued, her voice steady and cold. You walk into this house uninvited, insult me in my own drawing room, and expect me to cower because you're lovely and connected and everyone fears your opinion. But here's what you don't understand. I've spent 7 years being invisible. I've been overlooked, dismissed, and forgotten by every person who matters in society. Your insults are nothing compared to what I've already survived. She took a step forward, and Victoria actually stepped back. So yes, Lady Victoria, the Duke of Ravenshire has shown me attention. Whether that attention continues or ends tomorrow doesn't change what I've learned, that I would rather be alone and authentic than partnered and pretending. If you find that concept difficult to grasp, perhaps you should examine why your worth depends so heavily on a man's opinion of you. The silence that followed was absolute. Victoria's face had gone from white to crimson. Her companions looked between Eleanor and their leader with wide eyes. Lady Caroline appeared torn between pride and horror. And Alexander was smiling. Not a polite social smile, but genuine amusement and something deeper. Respect. Get out of my house, Eleanor said quietly to Victoria. All of you, you're not welcome here. For a moment, Victoria seemed frozen between rage and disbelief. Then she gathered what remained of her dignity and swept toward the door, her companions scrambling after her. You'll regret this, Victoria hissed as she passed Eleanor. I'll make certain of it. You're welcome to try. When they were gone, Eleanor's legs nearly gave out. She sank onto the nearest chair, her hands shaking with delayed reaction. The adrenaline that had carried her through the confrontation was draining away, leaving exhaustion in its wake. Eleanor. Her mother's voice was barely a whisper. Do you have any idea what you've done? Yes. I've made an enemy of the most vindictive woman in London. I'm aware. Lady Victoria has connections everywhere. She can destroy us socially, utterly and completely. Then we'll be destroyed. Eleanor looked up at her mother, too tired for diplomacy. I'm done apologizing for existing, Mother. I'm done shrinking to make other people comfortable. If society can't handle honesty, perhaps society needs to change. Lady Caroline opened her mouth, closed it, and then, to Eleanor's complete shock, laughed. It was a short, sharp sound, almost bitter. You sounded exactly like your father just then. He used to say the same things. Her expression softened slightly. I'd forgotten how much you take after him. Before Eleanor could process this, Alexander spoke. Lady Whitford, I wonder if I might speak with Eleanor privately, truly privately this time. Lady Caroline studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded and left the room, closing the door behind her with a soft click. Eleanor and Alexander stared at each other across the flower-filled drawing room. That was either the bravest or the most foolish thing I've ever witnessed, he said finally. Probably both. He crossed to her chair and knelt, bringing his face level with hers. Eleanor Whitford, you are the most extraordinary woman I have ever met. I'm really not. Stop. Stop diminishing yourself. Stop pretending you're ordinary when you're anything but. His hands covered hers. I came here today to court you properly, to follow all the correct social steps and give you time to adjust to the idea. But after watching you face down Victoria Ashford with nothing but honesty and courage, I'm done with patience. Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs. Your Grace, I want to marry you, Eleanor, not because you're convenient or appropriate or politically advantageous, because you're you, because you see the world clearly and refuse to pretend otherwise, because you make me want to be better than the role society has written for me. You barely know me. I know enough. I know that you're intelligent, honest, and brave enough to stand up to the most powerful people in London. I know that you see people as they actually are, not as they present themselves. I know that you've survived 7 years of systematic dismissal without becoming bitter or cruel. His grip on her hands tightened. I know that you make me feel like myself for the first time in years. This is insane, Eleanor whispered. We've known each other for barely a week. Then give me more time. Give me a month, 6 months, however long you need. But don't push me away because you're afraid of what other people will think. Eleanor looked into his dark eyes and saw something that terrified her more than Victoria's threats or her family's disappointment: genuine feeling. This wasn't a game to him. This wasn't novelty or rebellion. He actually meant it. "If I say yes," she said slowly, "everything changes. For both of us. You'll be the duke who married beneath his station. I'll be the woman who trapped you. Our children, if we have children, will face questions about their mother's suitability. Society will never let us forget that this was unusual. I don't care about society's opinion. You should. You have responsibilities, a title to maintain, a legacy. My legacy will be determined by the life I choose, not the one chosen for me." Alexander's voice was fierce. "I've spent 35 years being exactly what everyone expected. The perfect duke, the political asset, the social prize. And I've been miserable. Then I met you, and for the first time I remembered what it felt like to want something for myself. What if you're wrong? What if I'm just a novelty that wears off? Then we'll discover that together. But Eleanor, I don't believe I'm wrong. Do you?" She wanted to say yes, wanted to protect them both from the inevitable pain. But sitting there with his hands covering hers, his eyes earnest and unguarded, she couldn't force the lie. "No," she whispered. "I don't think you're wrong. I'm just terrified you'll realize you should be. Then we'll be terrified together." He stood pulling her up with him. "Eleanor Whitford, will you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" The question hung between them, heavy with possibility and danger. Eleanor thought of her sisters, who would never forgive her, her mother, who would probably see this as validation after years of disappointment, the society that would whisper and judge and never quite accept her. But she also thought of 7 years standing at the edges of ballrooms, 7 years of being invisible, 7 years of watching life happen to everyone else while she waited for permission to exist. "Yes," she heard herself say. "Yes, I'll marry you." Alexander's face transformed with a smile that was pure joy. He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it with a reverence that made her chest ache. "There's one condition," Eleanor added quickly. "Anything. The engagement must be real. I won't be a placeholder or a rebellion or a point you're making about society. If we're doing this, we're equals, partners, or we're nothing." "Agreed." Absolutely agreed. He was still smiling, looking younger and less guarded than she'd ever seen him. "When can I announce it?" "Not yet. Give me a week to prepare my family, to prepare myself." Eleanor's practical nature reasserted itself. "And we should spend time together, actually get to know each other beyond grand gestures and confrontations." "That sounds remarkably sensible. One of us has to be." He laughed, and the sound filled the flower-heavy room with warmth. "Tomorrow, I'll take you driving again, and the day after, we'll attend the theater, and the day after that, one day at a time, Your Grace." "Alexander," he corrected. "You're going to be my Duchess. You should probably start using my name." "Duchess." The word landed like a stone in water, sending ripples of unreality through Eleanor's chest. This was actually happening. She was actually doing this. She was either the bravest or the most foolish woman in London. Probably both. That night, Eleanor sat in her room long after everyone else had gone to bed, staring at her reflection in the mirror by candlelight. The same unremarkable face looked back at her. Mouse-brown hair, gray eyes, features that would never launch ships or inspire poetry. But something had changed. Not in her appearance, but in the way she held herself, in the set of her shoulders and the clarity in her eyes. She'd stopped apologizing for existing. The next 5 days passed in a blur of controlled chaos. Alexander was true to his word. He appeared every afternoon with a new plan. They drove through Hyde Park, attended the theater, visited a museum, walked through Kew Gardens. And slowly, carefully, they talked. Real conversations, not the practiced small talk of courtship. He told her about his childhood, raised by tutors after his mother's death, groomed from age 12 to inherit one of England's most powerful titles. She told him about her father, who'd seen her mind before anyone else, who'd died before finishing teaching her to value herself. They discovered shared interests, a love of history, a fascination with architecture, a tendency toward sharp honesty that made others uncomfortable. They argued about politics and laughed over shared observations about society's absurdities. And with each passing day, Eleanor felt the terrifying certainty growing. This was real. Not performance, or novelty, or rebellion. Real. On the fifth evening, Alexander kissed her for the first time in the Whitford garden, hidden by rose bushes and gathering darkness. It was gentle and searching, and nothing like the dramatic kisses described in novels. It was better, real and uncertain, and entirely theirs. "I should go," he murmured against her hair, "before your mother sends out a search party." "Tomorrow?" "Always tomorrow. For the rest of our lives." The next morning, Lady Caroline summoned Eleanor to her study before breakfast. "The Duke has requested a formal meeting with me this afternoon," her mother said without preamble. "I assume he intends to ask for your hand officially." "Yes." Lady Caroline studied Eleanor's face for a long moment. "Are you certain about this, Eleanor? Truly certain? Because once this becomes public, there's no retreat. You'll be scrutinized more harshly than you can imagine. Every mistake will be magnified. Every imperfection highlighted. Society does not forgive unconventional matches easily." "I know. Do you? Do you really understand what you're choosing?" Her mother's voice softened slightly. "I've been hard on you, Eleanor, I know that. But it was because I thought I was preparing you for reality. I thought if I could just teach you to accept your place, you'd be spared disappointment. You taught me to disappear instead." Yes, the admission seemed to cost her something. "And I was wrong. Your father would be proud of you. The way you stood up to Lady Victoria, that took courage I didn't know you possessed." Eleanor felt something shift in her chest. This was as close to an apology as her mother had ever offered. "What will you tell the Duke when he asks?" Lady Caroline's smile was complicated. "That my daughter has chosen her own path, and I support her decision, even if it terrifies me." The formal interview that afternoon was brief and surprisingly cordial. Alexander requested Eleanor's hand with proper deference. Lady Caroline gave her blessing with careful grace. The settlement negotiations were handled by lawyers. By sunset, Eleanor was officially betrothed to the Duke of Ravenshire. The announcement would appear in the morning papers. That evening, Eleanor stood at her bedroom window, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Somewhere in London, printing presses were setting type that would change her life forever. By morning, everyone would know. The speculation would become concrete. The whispers would become roars. A knock at her door pulled her from her thoughts. "Come in." Beatrice entered, her beautiful face drawn and tired. She closed the door behind her and stood in silence for a long moment. "I owe you an apology," she said finally. "For what I said, for how I've treated you." Eleanor turned from the window. "Beatrice, no, let me finish. I've been cruel to you for years. I told myself it was because you didn't try hard enough, didn't make an effort, but the truth is I was angry that you didn't seem to care about the things that consumed me. Beauty, status, securing the right match. You were above it all, and I resented you for it. I wasn't above anything. I was just defeated. You were honest, and that made the rest of us look like we were lying." Beatrice crossed to stand beside Eleanor at the window. "Lord Ashworth proposed this afternoon." Eleanor's breath caught. "Beatrice, that's wonderful." "I said no." Silence. "What? Why?" Beatrice's laugh was soft and bitter. "Because watching you choose love over security made me realize I deserve the same. Ashworth doesn't love me. He loves my face and my father's money, and I'm tired of pretending that's enough." Eleanor reached for her sister's hand. "What will you do?" "I don't know yet, but I think I'd like to try being honest for a while. See where that leads." Beatrice squeezed Eleanor's hand. "Thank you for showing me there's another way." After Beatrice left, Eleanor remained at the window until full darkness fell. Tomorrow, everything would change. The announcement would appear. Society would react, and she would step into a life she'd never imagined possible. She was terrified. She was exhilarated. She was ready. The morning papers arrived at 7. By 8, the drawing room was filled with calling cards from people who'd ignored the Whitford family for years. By 9, 3 separate bouquets had arrived from families suddenly eager to curry favor with the future Duchess of Ravenshire. And at precisely 10 o'clock, a carriage pulled up bearing the Ravenshire crest. But it wasn't Alexander who emerged. It was Lady Victoria Ashford, dressed in black like she was attending a funeral, her face a mask of cold fury. She swept past the butler without waiting for announcement, her heels clicking against marble like gunshots. "Where is she?" Victoria's voice carried through the entrance hall. "Where's the little social climber who thinks she's won?" Eleanor descended the stairs with deliberate slowness, her heart hammering but her face calm. "Lady Victoria, to what do I owe this visit?" Victoria's laugh was sharp as broken glass. "Visit? Oh, darling, this isn't a visit. This is a warning." She pulled a folded paper from her reticule and held it up. "Do you know what this is?" "I'm sure you're about to tell me." "This is a letter from Alexander's late mother, written just before she died, extracting a promise from her son." Victoria's smile was vicious. A promise that he would marry me, that he would honor the understanding our families had reached years ago. The words hit like a physical blow. Eleanor felt the ground shift beneath her feet. "That's not possible," Eleanor heard herself say. Alexander would have mentioned, would he? A promise to a dying mother? The kind of sacred obligation that makes everything else, including a sudden, inexplicable engagement to a nobody, absolutely null and void? Lady Caroline appeared at the top of the stairs, her face pale. "Lady Victoria, if you have accusations to make, I have proof." Victoria's eyes glittered with triumph. "And I have witnesses who will testify that Alexander Ravenshire is promised to me, that any other engagement is invalid, that this pathetic attempt at social climbing will end exactly as it should, in humiliation and disgrace." Eleanor's mind raced. This couldn't be true. Alexander had been too certain, too genuine, but Victoria's confidence suggested she held real ammunition. "Leave my house," Eleanor said quietly. "Oh, I'm leaving, but not before I tell you what happens next." Victoria stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper only Eleanor could hear. "Tomorrow night is the Pemberton Ball, the first major social event since your pathetic announcement. Alexander will be there, and so will I. And by the end of the evening, everyone in London will know the truth, that you're a delusional spinster who mistook pity for love." She swept toward the door, then paused and looked back. "Enjoy your last day as a duchess-to-be, Miss Whitford. It's all you'll ever have." The door slammed behind her, leaving Eleanor standing in the suddenly silent entrance hall, her entire future hanging by a thread she'd just discovered might be about to snap. Eleanor stood frozen in the entrance hall, Victoria's words echoing in her mind like the aftershock of an explosion. A promise to a dying mother. Witnesses. Proof. The words assembled themselves into a weapon designed to destroy everything she'd just begun to believe possible. "Eleanor." Her mother's voice cut through the paralysis. Lady Caroline descended the stairs with careful precision, her face unreadable. "Go to your room." "Mother, I need to now, Eleanor." The command in her voice was absolute. Eleanor climbed the stairs on legs that felt disconnected from her body, each step requiring conscious effort. Behind her, she heard her mother issuing rapid instructions to the butler, her voice low and urgent. In her room, Eleanor sank onto the edge of her bed and tried to think through the panic flooding her system. Victoria had looked too confident, too certain. She wouldn't have made such specific claims without something to back them up. A letter from Alexander's mother. Witnesses. An understanding between families, but Alexander had never mentioned any of it. He'd been honest about everything else. His disillusionment with society, his reasons for choosing her, his intentions. Why would he hide a promise to his dying mother? Unless he didn't know it mattered, unless he thought he could simply override it with his own decisions, or unless Victoria was lying. A sharp knock interrupted her spiraling thoughts. Margaret entered without waiting for permission, her face grim. "I came as soon as I heard. Half of London saw Victoria storm into your house this morning. What did she say?" Eleanor told her everything. The letter, the promise, the threat. Margaret listened without interruption, her expression growing darker with each word. "It's a bluff," Margaret said when Eleanor finished. "You don't know that." "I know Victoria Ashford. If she had real proof, she wouldn't have come here to threaten you privately. She'd have gone straight to the scandal sheets. This is intimidation, not evidence." But what if she does have a letter? What if there was an understanding? Margaret crossed to the window, her mind clearly working through possibilities. Even if there was an understanding years ago, it would have no legal standing unless a formal betrothal was announced. Did Victoria mention a public engagement? No, just a promise. Then it's worthless. A promise to a dying parent might carry moral weight, but it has no legal authority. Alexander is free to marry whomever he chooses. Margaret turned back to Eleanor. The real question is whether you believe he would have hidden something like that from you. Eleanor thought of their conversations over the past week, his honesty about his past relationships, his frustrations with society, his reasons for choosing her. He'd been almost brutally forthright about everything. No, she said slowly. He wouldn't hide it. If there was a promise, he either doesn't know about it or doesn't consider it binding. Then you have two choices. Confront him before the Pemberton ball and give Victoria time to spin whatever narrative she wants. Or trust him, attend the ball beside him, and let Victoria make her accusations publicly where they can be publicly refuted. The second option is insane. The second option is bold, and boldness is what got you this far. Margaret's smile was sharp. Besides, I've never seen Victoria Ashford publicly humiliated. It might be worth the risk just for the entertainment value. Despite everything, Eleanor felt a smile tug at her lips. You're terrible. I'm practical. Now, what are you going to wear to this ball? Because if we're walking into battle, we should at least look magnificent doing it. 3 hours later, Alexander arrived at the Whitford townhouse looking concerned and slightly breathless, as if he'd run the entire way. I heard Victoria came here this morning, he said without preamble as Eleanor met him in the drawing room. What did she say? Eleanor studied his face carefully. He looked genuinely worried, not guilty or evasive. She claims to have a letter from your mother, a promise that you would marry her. Alexander's expression shifted from concern to fury so quickly it was almost frightening. That manipulative... He caught himself, visibly forcing calm. There is no promise. My mother died when I was 17. I was barely more than a child. But was there an understanding between your families? My mother and Victoria's mother were friends. They probably talked about their children marrying someday. Every aristocratic mother does that. But there was never a formal arrangement, never a contract, never a promise that would override my own choice as an adult. Then why is Victoria so confident? Alexander began pacing, his movements sharp with barely controlled anger. Because she's desperate. Her late husband left her wealthy, but no title, no real power. Marrying me would give her both. She's been angling for it for years, and I've been clear that I'm not interested. This is her last attempt to force my hand. She says she has witnesses. Witnesses to what? Childhood conversations between our mothers? That proves nothing. He stopped pacing and crossed to where Eleanor sat. Eleanor, look at me. There is no promise. There is no obligation. The only commitment I have is to you. She wanted to believe him. Every instinct told her he was telling the truth. But doubt was a poison that had been carefully dripped into her mind, and it was hard to ignore. The Pemberton ball is tomorrow night, Eleanor said quietly. Victoria plans to make her accusations there, publicly. Then we'll refute them publicly, together. Alexander took her hands. Unless you're having second thoughts? About you? No. About whether I'm strong enough to survive what's coming? Yes. His expression softened. You faced down Victoria in your own drawing room with nothing but honesty and courage. You've survived 7 years of systematic dismissal without losing yourself. You're stronger than you give yourself credit for, Eleanor. Or I'm about to discover exactly how fragile I actually am. Then we'll discover it together. He raised her hand to his lips. I should go. I have matters to attend to before tomorrow night. But Eleanor, whatever Victoria threatens, whatever she claims, remember that I chose you, not out of pity or rebellion or novelty, because you're extraordinary, and no letter from the past can change that. After he left, Eleanor sat in the drawing room for a long time, trying to steady her nerves. Tomorrow night would determine everything. Either she would emerge as Alexander's acknowledged fiancée, or she would be exposed as a delusional social climber who'd mistaken pity for love. There was no middle ground. That evening, her sisters appeared at her bedroom door together, a united front that immediately put Eleanor on guard. We want to help, Cecilia said without preamble. Eleanor looked up from the book she'd been failing to read. Help with what? Tomorrow night, the ball. Louisa stepped forward, her young face earnest. We know Victoria is planning something. The entire city knows. And we want to stand with you. You don't have to do that. Yes, we do. Beatrice's voice was firm. You're our sister, and we've been terrible to you. Let us try to make it right." Eleanor felt something shift in her chest, a thawing of ice she hadn't realized had formed. "I don't know what you could do. We can be visible," Cecilia interrupted. "All of us, together, standing beside you. It makes it harder for Victoria to paint you as an outsider if your own family is clearly supporting you." "And we can spread our own narrative," Beatrice added. "We're beautiful, remember? People listen to us. If we tell everyone that Alexander pursued you, chose you specifically, made his intentions clear from the start, it undermines whatever story Victoria tries to tell." Louisa nodded enthusiastically. "We can work the room, talk to the right people, make sure the truth is out there before Victoria has a chance to poison it." Eleanor stared at her sisters, seeing them clearly, perhaps for the first time. They weren't just beautiful ornaments, they were intelligent, socially adept, and, when motivated, formidable allies. "Why?" Eleanor asked. "Why would you do this for me?" Beatrice's expression softened. "Because you showed us there's more to life than securing the right marriage. Because you chose yourself over safety. And because despite how we've treated you, you're still our sister. And because," Cecilia added with a small smile, "watching you take down Victoria Ashford would be the most entertaining thing to happen in London in years." Despite the tension knotting her stomach, Eleanor laughed. "All right, tell me your plan." They stayed up late into the night, the four Whitford sisters plotting strategy like generals before a battle. Beatrice would work the older matrons, emphasizing Alexander's pursuit and Eleanor's reluctant acceptance. Cecilia would charm the younger set, spinning it as a romantic tale of unexpected love. Louisa would focus on the men, who were often overlooked in social calculations but whose opinions influenced their mothers and wives. And Eleanor would simply be herself, honest, direct, unafraid. By the time her sisters left, Eleanor felt something she hadn't expected. Hope. Not the fragile, desperate hope of before, but something stronger. Strategic hope. The hope that came from having a plan and allies and the willingness to fight. The next day passed in a blur of preparation. Mary helped Eleanor dress in a gown that Margaret had commissioned specifically for the occasion, deep sapphire silk that brought unexpected warmth to her gray eyes, cut in a style that was elegant without being ostentatious. Her hair was arranged simply, without the elaborate curls that never suited her anyway. "You look like yourself," Mary said approvingly. "Just elevated." "I look terrified. That too, but nobody needs to know that." The Whitford family arrived at the Pemberton Ball together, a united front that immediately drew attention. Lady Caroline held her head high, playing the role of proud mother to perfection. Eleanor's sisters flanked her on either side, their beauty drawing eyes that then slid to Eleanor with curiosity rather than dismissal. The ballroom was already crowded, society's elite packed into the Pemberton mansion like jewels in a box. Conversation faltered as the Whitfords entered, then resumed at twice the volume. Everyone speculating, gossiping, waiting for the drama they sensed coming. Eleanor scanned the room and found Alexander almost immediately. He stood near the far wall, dressed in formal black that made him look every inch the powerful duke he was. Their eyes met across the crowded space, and he smiled, small, private, meant only for her. Then Victoria Ashford materialized at his side, her hand possessive on his arm, her emerald dress cut to maximize every advantage nature had given her. She leaned close to Alexander, whispering something that made his expression harden. "She's staking her claim," Beatrice murmured. "Bold strategy." "Or desperate," Cecilia countered. "Look at Alexander's face. He's not pleased." Eleanor watched as Alexander firmly removed Victoria's hand from his arm and said something that made her smile falter. Then he excused himself and began making his way through the crowd, toward Eleanor. The ballroom noticed. Conversations died mid-sentence. Heads turned. The social calculation was immediate and obvious. Whom would the Duke acknowledge? The acknowledged beauty who'd been assumed his future bride, or the unexpected fiancé who'd shocked everyone? Alexander's path never wavered. He crossed directly to Eleanor, bowed over her hand, and said loud enough for nearby guests to hear, "Miss Whitford, you look radiant tonight." "Your Grace, thank you for coming. I wouldn't miss it." His eyes held hers with an intensity that made everything else fade. "Dance with me?" It wasn't really a question. Eleanor took his offered arm and let him lead her onto the floor as the orchestra struck up a waltz. The crowd parted for them, and Eleanor felt the weight of 100 speculative stares. "Victoria threatened you this morning," Alexander said as they began to turn. "I want you to know I've taken steps to address it." "What kind of steps?" "The kind that involve lawyers and witnesses, and a very clear statement about the absence of any binding agreement between our families." His jaw tightened. "She won't destroy what we have, Eleanor. I won't allow it." "You can't control everything, Alexander." "Perhaps not, but I can control whom I marry, and I've chosen you." The certainty in his voice steadied something inside her. They danced in silence for several measures, Eleanor acutely aware of the scrutiny surrounding them. "She's going to make a scene," Eleanor said quietly. "You know that, right? Victoria won't go down without a fight. Then we'll weather it, together." The waltz ended. Alexander escorted Eleanor back to where her family waited, and the evening proceeded with the brittle tension of a string pulled too tight. Eleanor's sisters dispersed through the crowd as planned, spreading their carefully crafted narrative. Lady Caroline held court with the older matrons, deflecting questions with practiced grace, and Victoria watched from across the room, her beautiful face a mask of calculation. The confrontation came during the supper break, when guests had spread throughout the mansion and guards were down. Eleanor was accepting a glass of champagne from a footman when Victoria's voice cut through the general conversation. "How charming! The future Duchess, enjoying the privileges she's worked so hard to secure." Eleanor turned slowly to find Victoria surrounded by a small cluster of society's most influential women, Mrs. Pemberton, Lady Hartwick, the Dowager Duchess of Somerset. An audience carefully assembled for maximum impact. "Lady Victoria, are you enjoying the evening?" "Oh, immensely. Though I must confess, I'm confused about one small matter. Perhaps you could clarify for me." Victoria's smile was poisonous. "When exactly did the Duke propose to you? Before or after he promised his late mother he would marry me?" The room went silent. Every nearby conversation died. Eleanor felt the attention of 100 guests swing toward them like a physical force. This was it. The moment Victoria had been building toward. Eleanor met her gaze steadily. "The Duke never promised his mother any such thing, but you already know that, don't you?" "I have a letter that says otherwise." "Then produce it." Victoria's smile faltered slightly. "I don't carry personal correspondence to balls. How convenient. You make dramatic accusations but can't provide proof." Eleanor took a step forward. "Let me guess. This letter is safely locked away somewhere, available for viewing only under very specific circumstances that will never quite materialize." "How dare you? No, Lady Victoria, how dare you?" Eleanor's voice carried through the silent room with absolute clarity. "You've spent the last week threatening me, spreading rumors, trying to undermine my engagement because you can't accept that the Duke chose someone else. But here's what you don't seem to understand. I didn't trap him. I didn't scheme or manipulate or play games. I was simply myself, and that was enough." "You're a nobody," Victoria hissed, her composure cracking. "A plain, unremarkable nobody who got lucky." "You're right. I am plain. I am unremarkable by your standards. But apparently, I'm also honest enough and brave enough to be chosen by a man who is tired of performance and pretense." Eleanor's voice softened, became almost gentle. "I'm sorry you can't accept that. I'm sorry your worth is so tied up in being the most beautiful woman in any room that you can't imagine why someone might value something else. But that's your limitation, not mine." "This isn't over," Victoria said, her voice shaking with rage. "I'll expose you. I'll make sure everyone knows." "Knows what, exactly?" The new voice came from behind Eleanor. She turned to find Alexander standing there, flanked by 2 older gentlemen she didn't recognize. His expression was colder than she'd ever seen it. "Gentlemen," Alexander said, addressing the crowd, "may I present Lord Ashford and Mr. Pemberton, my solicitor. They've been kind enough to review my family's private correspondence at my request. Lord Ashford, perhaps you could share what you discovered." The older of the 2 men stepped forward, his expression grave. "I've examined all correspondence between the late Duchess of Ravensshire and Lady Victoria's mother, the late Lady Ashford. While there were indeed discussions about the possibility of a future match between their children, there was never any formal agreement, contract, or binding promise. The conversations were speculative at best, typical of friendly correspondence between aristocratic mothers. But, Victoria started. Furthermore, Alexander interrupted, his voice cutting like steel, I've made my intentions absolutely clear. I am engaged to Miss Eleanor Whitford. That engagement is legal, binding, and entirely my own choice. Any suggestion otherwise is not only false, but slanderous. The silence in the room was absolute. Victoria's face had gone white, then red, cycling through emotions too quickly to track. Mrs. Pemberton took a small step away from her, distancing herself from the scandal. You're doing this to humiliate me, Victoria whispered. No, Alexander said quietly. You're doing that yourself. I'm simply correcting the record. He turned to Eleanor and offered his hand. Miss Whitford, would you join me on the terrace? I find I need some air. Eleanor took his hand, feeling the solidity of his grip anchoring her. They walked through the crowd together, people parting for them like water around stone. Behind them, Eleanor could hear the explosion of gossip beginning, whispered speculation that would become tomorrow's scandal. On the terrace, the cool night air felt like salvation after the stifling tension of the ballroom. Eleanor leaned against the stone balustrade, her hands shaking with delayed reaction. That was, she started, terrifying, exhilarating, absolutely necessary. Alexander stood beside her, his shoulder touching hers. I'm sorry I didn't warn you. I wanted Victoria to think she had the advantage, make her move before she knew I'd already dismantled her ammunition. You could have told me. I could have, but then you might have held back, and watching you face her down with nothing but truth was— He paused, searching for words. It was the moment I knew with absolute certainty that you're exactly who I need beside me. Eleanor turned to look at him. She'll never forgive this. She'll be our enemy for life. I know. Can you live with that? Can you? Eleanor, I've spent my entire life managing enemies and allies, calculating political advantage, maintaining careful balances. It's exhausting. What I want now is something real. Someone real. If that costs me Victoria Ashford's goodwill, I'll survive. What about everyone else? The people in that ballroom who think I'm unsuitable, who believe I'm too plain or too unremarkable or too— What about them? Alexander turned to face her fully, his hands coming up to frame her face. Eleanor Whitford, you walked into that confrontation without knowing I'd brought witnesses. You faced down the most vicious woman in London with nothing but your own honesty. You didn't flinch. You didn't apologize for existing. You just stood there and told the truth. Do you know how rare that is? How valuable? I was terrified the entire time. Being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means being scared and doing it anyway. He leaned forward, his forehead touching hers. I love you, Eleanor. Not despite your plainness or your honesty or your tendency to question everything. Because of those things. Because you make me want to be better than I am. The words landed like an earthquake, shifting everything in Eleanor's world. You love me? Desperately. Entirely. Probably unwisely, given that you keep trying to talk me out of this. His smile was soft, genuine, completely unguarded. Marry me, Eleanor. Not because society expects it, or because we've announced it, or because it makes political sense. Marry me because we make each other better, because we're honest with each other, because I can't imagine building a life with anyone else. Eleanor felt tears pressing hot behind her eyes. I love you too. Even though it's insane and we barely know each other and this entire situation is impossible. But? No but. I just love you. That's all. He kissed her then, on the Pemberton terrace with the sounds of scandal erupting behind them and the night air cool around them. It was gentle and fierce and entirely real. When they returned to the ballroom several minutes later, the atmosphere had shifted. Victoria was gone. Fled, according to Beatrice, shortly after Alexander's public refutation. The gossips had moved on to dissecting what had happened, and the tone had changed from speculation to something closer to acceptance. Eleanor's sisters materialized around her, their faces bright with triumph. That was magnificent, Cecilia breathed. The way you called her bluff? And then the Duke brought witnesses. Louise's eyes were wide. It was like something from a novel. Beatrice squeezed Eleanor's hand. You were brave, braver than I've ever been. Lady Caroline approached, her expression complex. Well, that certainly settled matters. Half of London will be talking about this for months. I'm sorry if I've embarrassed the family, Eleanor started. Embarrassed? Her mother's laugh was short and sharp. Eleanor, you just publicly faced down Victoria Ashford and won. The Duke of Ravenshire declared his love for you in front of society's elite. Our family's status just increased tenfold. If anything, I should thank you. It wasn't the warm maternal approval Eleanor had always craved, but it was acknowledgement. That was something. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. People who'd ignored Eleanor for years suddenly wanted introductions. Matrons who'd dismissed her sought her opinion. Men who'd looked through her now treated her with careful respect. The power dynamic had shifted so completely that Eleanor felt dizzy with it. Near midnight, as the ball was winding down, an older woman approached. The Dowager Duchess of Somerset, one of society's most formidable arbiters of taste. "Miss Whitford," she said, her voice carrying the authority of decades of social dominance. "I wanted to offer my congratulations and my apologies." Eleanor blinked. "Your Grace, I don't understand. I've known Alexander since he was born. I watched him grow into his title, watched him navigate the expectations and pressures that come with such power. And I've watched him become increasingly unhappy playing the role society demanded." The Dowager's shrewd eyes studied Eleanor's face. "You've given him something he's never had, the freedom to be himself. For that alone, you have my respect." "Thank you, Your Grace. Don't thank me yet. The real work begins after the wedding. Being a duchess is not for the faint of heart." Her smile was knowing. "But I suspect you're stronger than you look. You'll need to be." As the Dowager moved away, Margaret appeared at Eleanor's elbow. "Well," she said, handing Eleanor a glass of champagne, "you've officially arrived. The Dowager's blessing is basically social canonization." Eleanor sipped the champagne, trying to process the evening's emotional whiplash. "I'm not sure what just happened. You won. You stood up to Victoria, proved her wrong, and emerged as the acknowledged future Duchess of Ravenshire. You went from invisible to untouchable in approximately 4 hours." Margaret's grin was sharp. "How does it feel?" Eleanor looked across the ballroom to where Alexander stood talking with several members of Parliament, looking entirely in his element. As if sensing her gaze, he looked up and smiled. That private smile meant only for her. "Terrifying," Eleanor admitted. "But also, right. Like I finally stopped pretending to be less than I am." "Good. Because there's no going back now. You're going to be one of the most powerful women in England. What will you do with that power?" Eleanor hadn't thought that far ahead. She'd been so focused on surviving the immediate crisis that she hadn't considered what came after. But standing in the Pemberton ballroom, surrounded by people who finally saw her, she felt something crystallize inside her. "I'm going to use it to help other women like me," she said slowly. "The overlooked ones, the plain ones. The women's society dismisses because they don't fit a specific mold. I'm going to show them there's another way." Margaret's smile widened. "Now that's the kind of revolution I can support." The ride home was quiet, each Whitford sister lost in her own thoughts. But when they arrived at the townhouse, Beatrice touched Eleanor's arm. "Thank you," she said softly, "for showing us what courage looks like." That night, Eleanor stood at her bedroom window for the last time as simply Eleanor Whitford. Tomorrow, she would begin the formal transition to becoming a duchess. Tomorrow, the bans would be read. Tomorrow, her life would officially change. But tonight, she was just herself. Plain, honest, brave Eleanor who'd refused to disappear. And that, she realized, had been enough. More than enough. It had been everything. Morning arrived with the knock that pulled Eleanor from the first deep sleep she'd had in weeks. Mary entered bearing a silver tray piled with correspondence. More calling cards, more invitations, more evidence that her world had fundamentally shifted overnight. "Miss Eleanor, you'll want to see this one first." Mary handed her a cream-colored envelope bearing the royal seal. Eleanor's hands trembled slightly as she broke the wax. Inside, in elegant script, was an invitation to a private tea with Princess Charlotte herself. Not a general court function, but a personal audience. The kind of invitation that signaled royal approval and social elevation beyond anything Eleanor had imagined possible. "The princess," Eleanor breathed. "She wants to meet me." Half of London wants to meet you now, miss. You're the woman who took down Victoria Ashford and won the Duke of Ravenshire. That makes you either the bravest or the luckiest woman in England. Or the most foolish. Mary's smile was knowing. Those three things often look the same until the story's finished. The next week passed in a whirlwind of preparation. The wedding was set for 6 weeks hence, a short engagement by aristocratic standards, but Alexander had been adamant about not waiting. Eleanor found herself swept into a world of seamstresses and jewelers, wedding planners and estate managers, all treating her with a deference that still felt surreal. But it was the letter that arrived on Thursday that changed everything. Eleanor was reviewing fabric samples with her mother when the butler brought in the post. Among the usual invitations and social correspondence was a single envelope addressed in a hand Eleanor didn't recognize. The return address made her breath catch. Hartwell House, Somerset. What is it? Lady Caroline asked, noting Eleanor's expression. Eleanor broke the seal and read quickly, her eyes widening with each line. It's from Lady Hartwell, Lord Hartwell's mother, the one who withdrew his suit from Cecilia after the Duke showed interest in me. And? She's apologizing. She says she acted hastily, influenced by Victoria Ashford's poisonous speculation. She wants to know if Cecilia would consider receiving Lord Hartwell again, now that the true character of all involved has been revealed. Eleanor looked up at her mother. She's asking for a second chance. Lady Caroline's expression was complex, triumph mixed with something that might have been grudging respect. The tide has turned. They're afraid of being on the wrong side now that you have the Duke's favor and the princess's attention. Should I tell Cecilia? That's her choice to make, but Eleanor... Her mother paused, choosing words carefully. You've given your sisters opportunities they wouldn't have had otherwise. Your courage opened doors for all of you. I hope you know that. It was the closest Lady Caroline had ever come to saying she was proud. Eleanor folded the letter carefully and went to find Cecilia. Her sister was in the music room, playing a melancholy piece on the pianoforte. She looked up when Eleanor entered, her fingers stilling on the keys. I have something for you, Eleanor said, holding out the letter. Cecilia read it in silence, her expression shifting from surprise to uncertainty to something that might have been hope. She wants him to court me again. Only if you want that. You don't owe the Hartwells anything after how they treated you. I liked him, Cecilia admitted quietly. Lord Hartwell. He was kind, thoughtful. We had real conversations, not just the usual social performance. When his mother withdrew his suit, I was devastated, but now... She looked up at Eleanor. Is this real? Or are they just trying to curry favor with you? Does it matter? If you like him and he likes you, the rest is just noise. Cecilia's laugh was soft and slightly bitter. When did you become so wise? When I stopped caring what other people thought and started listening to what I actually wanted. Eleanor sat beside her sister on the piano bench. You told me you wanted to try being honest. Here's your chance. Do you want to see Lord Hartwell again? Yes, but I'm afraid. Of what? Of being hurt again. Of trusting that this time it's real. Cecilia's fingers traced idle patterns on the piano keys. How do you do it? How do you trust that the Duke actually loves you and isn't just making some kind of point about society? Eleanor thought about Alexander's hands framing her face on the Pemberton terrace, his voice when he'd said he loved her, the way he looked at her when he thought no one else was watching. I don't know if I can explain it, but when he looks at me, I feel seen. Not as a duchess or a social statement or a rebellion against convention, just as myself. And that feeling is either real or I'm the most deluded woman in England. I've decided to believe it's real. That's terrifying. Everything worth having is. Cecilia hugged her suddenly, fiercely. Thank you for showing me it's possible. The royal tea took place 3 days later in Princess Charlotte's private apartments at Windsor. Eleanor arrived in her finest day dress, a creation of pale lavender that Mary swore made her look almost regal, her stomach knotted with nerves. The princess was 21, lively and intelligent, with a reputation for unconventional opinions and a rebellious streak that constantly horrified her father, the Prince Regent. She greeted Eleanor with genuine warmth, dismissing her attendants so they could speak privately. Miss Whitford, I've been dying to meet you. The whole court is talking about your engagement. And frankly, it's the most interesting thing to happen in months. Charlotte poured tea herself, a deliberate breach of protocol that immediately put Eleanor at ease. Tell me, is it true you told Victoria Ashford that her worth was too tied up in being beautiful to understand why someone might value something else? Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks. I may have said something along those lines, Your Highness. Charlotte laughed delightedly. Brilliant. Victoria has been insufferable for years and nobody dared challenge her. You walked in and demolished her with pure honesty. I respect that immensely. I'm not sure I demolished her so much as survived her, Your Highness. Don't diminish what you did. Do you know how rare it is to see someone stand up to social pressure and win, especially a woman? Charlotte leaned forward, her expression turning serious. I invited you here because I wanted to meet the woman who refused to perform. My entire life is performance. What I wear, what I say, whom I'm seen with. Everything is calculated for political advantage. But you just told the truth and let society adjust to you rather than the other way around. It wasn't a strategy, Your Highness. I was just too tired to pretend anymore. Then you're braver than you know. Or perhaps wisdom and exhaustion look the same sometimes. Charlotte sipped her tea thoughtfully. I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly. Do you love the Duke, or did you accept him because it was the best option available? Eleanor met the princess's gaze steadily. I love him, desperately, in a way that probably makes me vulnerable and foolish, but it's real. Good, because he loves you too, I can tell. I've known Alexander for years, and I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you. Charlotte smiled. I'm tired of watching people marry for advantage and live in quiet misery. It's refreshing to see an actual love match, even if it does upset the social order. I hope I haven't caused too much disruption, Your Highness. Oh, you've caused tremendous disruption. It's wonderful. Keep doing it. They talked for another hour, about books and politics and the absurdities of court life. When Eleanor finally left, she felt something shift inside her. The Princess of England had called her brave, had validated her choices, had suggested that refusing to perform might actually be revolutionary. The wedding preparations intensified as the date approached. Eleanor's gown was a masterpiece of ivory silk and delicate lace, elegant without being ostentatious. The ceremony would take place at St. George's Chapel, a venue usually reserved for royal weddings, another sign of how completely her status had transformed. But it was the evening before the wedding that everything came to a head. Eleanor was in her room trying unsuccessfully to calm her nerves when Mary announced an unexpected visitor. Lady Victoria Ashford is downstairs, miss. She's asking to speak with you, alone. Eleanor's first instinct was to refuse, but curiosity, and perhaps a need for final closure, made her nod. Show her up, but stay close. Victoria entered Eleanor's bedroom looking different than Eleanor had ever seen her. No dramatic entrance, no entourage, no performance. Just a woman in a simple day dress, her beautiful face drawn and tired. Thank you for seeing me, Victoria said quietly. I wasn't certain you would. I almost didn't. What do you want, Victoria? To apologize. The words came out stiff, clearly unpracticed. For what I said at the Pemberton ball. For the threats, the manipulation, the cruelty. For all of it. Eleanor studied her carefully, looking for signs of deception. Why? What do you gain from apologizing now? Victoria's laugh was bitter. Nothing. I gain nothing. I've lost everything, actually. Half of society won't receive me after the Pemberton disaster. The other half only tolerates me because I'm still wealthy. My reputation is destroyed, and it's my own fault. Then why come here? Because you were right. Victoria crossed to the window, her back to Eleanor. Everything you said about me, about my worth being too tied up in being beautiful, about needing validation from men to feel important, it was all true. I've spent my entire life being the most beautiful woman in every room, and I thought that would be enough. But it's not, is it? Beauty fades. Men lose interest. And if that's all you have, you're left with nothing. Eleanor felt an unexpected pang of sympathy. Victoria, I hated you, Victoria continued, her voice raw. When Alexander looked at you instead of me, I hated you with everything in me. Because if a plain woman could win a duke, what did that say about me? About everything I'd built my identity on? It felt like the entire foundation of my world was crumbling. So you tried to destroy me instead of questioning your foundation. Yes, and I failed, spectacularly. Victoria turned back to face Eleanor. But watching you at that ball, the way you stood there without flinching, the way you told the truth, even when it was terrifying, I realized something. You're free in a way I've never been. You don't need anyone's approval to exist. You just exist, and that's powerful. It's not power, it's just survival. No, it's more than that. Survival is enduring. What you do is living. Victoria's smile was sad. I came here to apologize, but also to ask you something. When you're the Duchess, when you have all that power and influence, will you remember what it's like to be dismissed? Will you use that power to help women who aren't beautiful enough, or connected enough, or perfect enough? Eleanor thought of her conversation with Margaret, her promise to help the overlooked women. Yes, I will. Good. Then maybe some good will come from this disaster after all. Victoria moved toward the door, then paused. I won't be at your wedding tomorrow. I'm leaving London for a while, going to my estate in the country, removing myself from society until the scandal dies down. But Eleanor, she met Eleanor's eyes directly. I hope you're happy. Truly. You deserve it more than I ever did. After Victoria left, Eleanor sat in silence for a long time, processing the encounter. She'd expected to feel triumphant, vindicated. Instead, she felt something closer to compassion. Victoria had been trapped by beauty the same way Eleanor had been trapped by plainness, both of them prisoners of a system that reduced women to their most superficial qualities. But Eleanor had found a way out, and tomorrow she would formalize that escape. The wedding day dawned clear and bright, a perfect autumn morning that seemed designed for new beginnings. Eleanor woke early, too nervous to sleep, and found her sisters already gathered in her room, Beatrice, Cecilia, and Louisa all dressed in complimentary gowns of soft rose. We have something for you, Beatrice said, producing a small velvet box. Inside was a delicate hair comb studded with tiny pearls, simple but elegant. It was our grandmother's. Mother thought you should wear it. Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes as Beatrice carefully secured the comb in her hair. Thank you, all of you, for standing beside me. We should thank you, Cecilia said. Lord Hartwell called yesterday. We're courting again, properly this time. Because of you. Because you were brave, Louisa added. You showed us it was possible to choose differently. The ceremony itself passed in a blur of candlelight and music, familiar faces and formal vows. Eleanor moved through it, feeling both present and distant, as if watching herself from outside her own body. She saw Alexander's face when she appeared at the chapel entrance, the way his expression transformed with genuine joy. She felt his hand steady and warm when they exchanged rings. She heard herself speak the vows that would bind her life to his. And then it was done. She was Eleanor Ravenshire, Duchess of Ravenshire. No longer invisible, no longer dismissible, untouchable. The wedding breakfast was a glittering affair attended by 500 of society's elite. Eleanor moved through it with Alexander at her side, accepting congratulations from people who'd ignored her for years. The irony wasn't lost on her, but it was during the toast that everything crystallized. The Dowager Duchess of Somerset stood, commanding immediate silence with her mere presence. She raised her glass, her shrewd eyes sweeping the assembled guests. I've attended many weddings in my 73 years, she began. Royal weddings, political alliances, marriages of convenience disguised as love matches. But this, she gestured to Eleanor and Alexander, this is something different. This is a woman who refused to perform and a man who valued that refusal. This is honesty triumphing over convention. And I propose we raise our glasses not just to their happiness, but to their courage. May they remember that the world changes not through grand gestures, but through small acts of authenticity. To the Duke and Duchess of Ravenshire. To the Duke and Duchess, the crowd echoed. Eleanor felt Alexander's hand find hers under the table, his fingers lacing through hers with easy intimacy. Later, when the formal celebrations had ended and guests had departed, Eleanor stood with Alexander on the terrace of Ravenshire House, her new home, vast and intimidating and filled with centuries of history. Overwhelmed, Alexander asked, pulling her close. Terrified. exhilarated, uncertain I'm qualified for any of this. You're the most qualified person I know. You survived 7 years of systematic dismissal without losing yourself. If you can survive that, you can survive anything. He tilted her chin up to meet his gaze. Besides, you're not doing this alone. We're partners, remember? Partners, Eleanor repeated, testing the word. It felt solid, real, nothing like the performance she'd watched other couples engage in. Alexander, I need to tell you something. All right. I'm going to use this position, Duchess, your wife, whatever power comes with it, to help other women. The overlooked ones. The ones society dismisses because they don't fit the right mold. I'm going to create something that gives them options beyond waiting to be chosen. Alexander's smile was slow and genuine. Tell me what you need, and I'll help you build it. Just like that? You don't want to know the details, the costs, the potential scandal. Eleanor, I married you because you see the world clearly and refuse to accept its cruelties as inevitable. If you want to burn the whole system down and rebuild it better, I'll hand you the matches. He kissed her forehead gently. Besides, scandal doesn't frighten me. Haven't you noticed? 3 months later, Eleanor stood in the drawing room of a townhouse she'd purchased with her own funds, a wedding gift from Alexander that had shocked her with its generosity. The house had been transformed into something unprecedented, a school for young women offering education in mathematics, literature, philosophy, and practical skills that would allow them to support themselves independently. The inaugural class consisted of 12 students, daughters of merchants, minor gentry, women who'd been dismissed as unremarkable by society's standards. Eleanor had personally selected each one, seeing in them the same spark of intelligence and resilience that had sustained her through 7 seasons of invisibility. Margaret stood beside her, reviewing the curriculum they'd spent weeks developing. You know the establishment will hate this, Margaret said. Educated women who don't need husbands to survive? That's revolutionary. Good. The establishment deserves to be unsettled. Eleanor watched through the window as the first students arrived, their faces bright with nervous excitement. These women deserve the same chance I got. The chance to be seen for who they actually are, not who society wants them to be. The Duchess's Academy for Overlooked Ladies, Margaret read from the brass plaque beside the door. Subtle. I thought about calling it something more diplomatic, but honesty seems to work for me. Why change now? Alexander appeared in the doorway, looking windblown and pleased. The first donors have committed. Between them, we have enough funding to sustain operations for at least 3 years. Lord Pemberton was particularly generous. I think his wife insisted after the whole Victoria debacle. Guilt money is still money, Margaret said pragmatically. The opening ceremony was small but significant. Eleanor addressed the students directly, no prepared speech or formal performance. You're here because someone, somewhere, told you that you weren't enough. Not pretty enough, not charming enough, not whatever arbitrary standard they'd decided mattered. But here's what I've learned. The people who dismiss you are wrong. Not mistaken. Wrong. And this place exists to prove that. You'll leave here with skills and knowledge that make you valuable on your own terms, not because someone else has chosen to value you. One student raised her hand tentatively, a girl of perhaps 19 with an intelligent face and nervous eyes. Your Grace, what if we fail? What if we're not smart enough or capable enough? Eleanor smiled. Then you'll fail, learn from it, and try again. That's what capability actually looks like, not perfection, but persistence. I spent 7 years being told I wasn't enough. The only reason I'm standing here now is because I finally stopped believing that story. Your job is to write your own story, whatever that looks like. As the students dispersed to their first classes, Alexander pulled Eleanor aside. You're going to change the world, he said quietly. You know that, right? I'm going to help 12 women get an education. That's hardly changing the world. It starts with 12, then 24, then 100. You're creating a model that proves there's another way. That's revolutionary, Eleanor, whether you're willing to call it that or not. 6 months after the wedding, Eleanor received an unexpected visitor at Ravenshire House. The butler announced Lady Victoria Ashford with obvious hesitation, clearly uncertain whether the Duchess would receive her. Eleanor was in the library reviewing applications for the Academy's second term. She considered refusing, then curiosity won out. Show her in. Victoria entered looking changed, Still beautiful, but softer somehow, less performative. She curtsied properly, showing deference Eleanor had never seen from her before. Your Grace, thank you for seeing me. Victoria, what brings you here? I've heard about your academy, the school for overlooked women. Victoria's hands twisted in her lap. I want to help. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. Help how? However you'll let me. Funding, connections, teaching. If you think I'm qualified. I've spent 6 months in the country thinking about what you said, about worth and performance and building identity on sand. And I've realized I don't know who I am without the performance. I want to learn, and I want to help other women avoid the mistakes I made. Eleanor studied Victoria's face, looking for deception or manipulation. She found only exhaustion and what looked like genuine humility. You understand this won't rehabilitate your reputation overnight? Some people will see your involvement as trying to buy back social standing. I know, but maybe that's appropriate. Maybe I should have to work for redemption instead of expecting it to be given. Victoria met Eleanor's eyes directly. You changed my life, Eleanor. You showed me there was another way to exist. I'm not asking for friendship or forgiveness. I'm asking for the chance to be useful. Eleanor thought for a long moment, weighing risks and possibilities. Then she nodded slowly. All right. We need someone to teach deportment and social navigation, how to move through society without being destroyed by it. You're qualified for that. But Victoria, her voice hardened. If you use this as an opportunity to undermine what we're building, I will remove you so fast you won't have time to curtsy. Are we clear? Perfectly clear. Thank you, Your Grace. After Victoria left, Margaret appeared from the adjoining room where she'd been deliberately eavesdropping. You're either incredibly forgiving or incredibly strategic. Which is it? Both. Victoria has skills these women will need, and showing that even the most beautiful woman in London needed to rebuild herself from honesty sends a powerful message. Eleanor smiled. Besides, keeping her close means I can watch her. Better to have her inside the revolution than plotting against it. Now you sound like a duchess. Is that good or bad? It's perfect. The academy thrived. By the end of its first year, 28 students had completed the program. Some found positions as governesses or companions, roles they'd been qualified for all along but never had access to. Others started small businesses, wrote for newspapers under male pseudonyms, or found employment in previously closed fields. But it was the ripple effects that mattered most. Other women, seeing what was possible, began questioning their own limitations. Other schools opened, copying the academy's model. The conversation began to shift, slowly, painfully, but undeniably. Eleanor found herself at the center of a movement she'd never intended to start simply by refusing to disappear. 2 years after her wedding, Eleanor stood in the throne room at St. James's Palace, having been summoned for a private audience with Princess Charlotte. The princess was now married herself, to Prince Leopold, a love match that had scandalized and delighted in equal measure. Eleanor, Charlotte said, dispensing with formality the moment they were alone, I need your advice. About what, Your Highness? I want to do what you did. Create something meaningful. Use my position for more than just producing heirs and looking decorative. Charlotte's expression was frustrated and determined. But I don't know where to start. Eleanor felt something shift in her chest, the recognition of a kindred spirit, even across the vast gulf of their positions. Start with one thing, Eleanor said. One specific problem you want to solve. Don't try to change everything at once. Just pick the thing that makes you angriest and figure out how to address it. Child welfare, Charlotte said immediately. The conditions orphans face in workhouses are barbaric. I want to change that. Then start there. Use your position to visit workhouses, document conditions, create public pressure for reform. You have power I'll never have, the power of royal attention. Use it. Charlotte's smile was fierce and grateful. They told me marrying you off to Ravenshire was the Duke's moment of rebellion. They were wrong. You're the rebellion, and you're showing the rest of us how to fight. Eleanor left the palace feeling the weight of responsibility and possibility in equal measure. She'd started by refusing to be invisible. Now she was teaching others to be seen. On the evening of her second wedding anniversary, Eleanor and Alexander hosted a dinner for the Academy's supporters and students. The Ravenshire dining room glittered with candlelight and conversation, filled with an unlikely mix of aristocrats and merchants, former students and current teachers, rebels and reformers. Eleanor stood to give a toast, Alexander at her side, her hand resting on the small swell of her abdomen where their first child grew. 2 years ago, I was invisible, she began. The overlooked daughter, the unremarkable sister, the woman society had decided didn't matter. I'd accepted that story as truth. But then someone saw me differently. She glanced at Alexander. And that changed everything. Not because his attention made me valuable, but because it made me question why I'd accepted everyone else's assessment of my worth. She looked around the room, meeting the eyes of women who'd been dismissed and men who'd learned to see differently. This academy exists because being overlooked doesn't mean being worthless. It means the people doing the overlooking have limited vision. Our job, all of us, is to expand that vision, to create a world where worth isn't determined by beauty or conformity, but by character and capability and courage. We're not there yet, but we're closer than we were, and that's worth celebrating. The toast was met with enthusiastic agreement and the clink of raised glasses. As Eleanor sat back down, Alexander leaned close. I'm proud of you. Every single day, I'm proud of you. Even when I'm causing scandals and upsetting the social order? Especially then. Later that night, alone in their private chambers, Eleanor stood at the window looking out over London's glittering darkness. Alexander joined her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. Do you ever regret it? He asked quietly. Choosing this path instead of the safe one? Eleanor thought about the question seriously. The past 2 years had been difficult. Constant scrutiny, social battles, the exhausting work of building something new while dismantling old assumptions. There had been moments of doubt, fear, loneliness, but there had also been triumph. Women finding their voices, lives changing course, the quiet revolution of refusing to perform. No, she said finally. I regret the years I wasted being invisible, but I don't regret becoming visible on my own terms. Good, because I have plans for our invisible no longer Duchess. His hand drifted to her abdomen. Our daughter will need a mother who shows her that worth comes from within, not from others' approval. You're certain it's a daughter? Hopeful. I want her to grow up seeing you as her model for womanhood, not beauty or performance, but authenticity and strength. Eleanor turned in his arms to face him. And if it's a son? Then he'll grow up understanding that women are people, not ornaments. Either way, our children will know better than we did. Alexander's expression grew serious. Eleanor, do you know what you've taught me? What? That power isn't about controlling others. It's about freeing them, and yourself, from false limitations. You've made me a better man and a better duke. You've made me braver. We made each other braver, Eleanor corrected. That's what partnership means. 3 months later, Eleanor gave birth to a daughter, Catherine Margaret Ravenshire, named for her grandmother's and inheriting her mother's gray eyes and her father's dark hair. Eleanor held her hours after the birth, exhausted and exhilarated, studying the tiny face that held infinite possibility. You'll never be invisible, Eleanor whispered to her sleeping daughter. I'll make sure of it. Not because you're beautiful or connected or perform correctly, but because you exist. That will always be enough. The years that followed brought change and challenge in equal measure. The Academy expanded to 3 locations. Princess Charlotte's reforms began transforming orphan care across England. The conversations about women's worth and education became mainstream, no longer shocking, but expected. And Eleanor Ravenshire, the overlooked daughter who'd refused to disappear, became a symbol of something larger than herself. Proof that the most dangerous woman in any system was the one who stopped playing by its rules. On the morning of her 40th birthday, Eleanor stood in the original Academy building, now much expanded and refined. Victoria Ashford, no longer beautiful in the conventional sense, but compelling in a way beauty had never made her, was teaching a class on navigating society without losing oneself. Margaret was leading a discussion on political theory, and the current students, 37 strong, represented every level of society except the very highest. Because the very highest had learned, slowly and painfully, that dismissing the overlooked was dangerous, Alexander found her there, watching through the classroom window, and slipped his hand into hers. "Thinking about what could have been?" he asked. "Thinking about what almost wasn't. If I'd refused you that first dance, if I'd let Victoria intimidate me, if I'd chosen safety over truth. But you didn't. No, I chose myself. And that made all the difference." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching young women learn that their worth wasn't dependent on others' recognition. That invisibility was a choice, not a destiny. That the most powerful thing any woman could do was refuse to perform. Eleanor Whitford Ravenshire had started as the forgotten daughter, the one nobody noticed, the woman society had already written off. She'd ended as the woman who taught a generation to see differently, not through beauty or charm or conventional power, but through the revolutionary act of being exactly, unapologetically herself. And in the end, that had been the most dangerous thing of all. Because once one woman stopped performing, others began to question why they were still playing roles. Once one woman claimed her worth without permission, others realized permission had never been necessary. The world didn't change overnight. Revolutions never did. But it changed, and it started with a plain woman in a crowded ballroom, refusing to be invisible anymore. That, Eleanor thought, as she watched the next generation of overlooked women claim their education and their futures, was legacy enough for any life. "Ready to go home?" Alexander asked. Eleanor took one last look at the academy, her rebellion, her revolution, her gift to the forgotten daughters who'd come after her. "Yes," she said, squeezing his hand. "I'm ready." And together, they walked out into the London afternoon, two people who'd chosen each other when the world said they shouldn't, and in doing so, had changed what choice itself could mean. The overlooked daughter had become unstoppable, and she was never invisible again.